The memories, what a mess. Bai Xiao frowned as he stood over the inert figure of Deathstrike. He hadn't bothered accessing her memories. The fragments were disjointed, scrambled from years of psychological manipulation. Brainwashing had overwritten her original self, burying the chaos beneath a veneer of obedience. That's why she followed Stryker's every command like a machine. Bai Xiao had no interest in fixing her. He didn't care to untangle the web of trauma and control. Instead, he sealed her mind even further, snuffing out any flicker of resistance. Like Stryker, she became an empty shell, obedient, hollow. Go, come on now. I did pay you, didn't I? He clapped his hands, turning his attention to the vat of solidified adamantium in front of him. Adamantium, Earth's most unbreakable metal. A rare treasure. Unfortunately, its remaining supply was limited to what Stryker had stockpiled here. After injecting it into Logan and Deathstrike, there was little use for the rest. Forging melee weapons was viable, but wielders were few and far between. Maybe Deadpool, with his chaotic energy, could make it work. But for others, it was dead weight. Bullets? A waste. Stryker had crafted a few and handed them to Wolverine, but that was all. Creating synthetic adamantium was a smarter route. So the stockpile had sat idle, forgotten like the lab itself. It waited for a new master to shape another experiment, another monster. With a few words from Bai Xiao, a handful of mutants moved into action, lifting the metal. The small ones, his radishes, served more as moral support. But among them, one mutant stood out, stocky, powerful, capable of hoisting tons of adamantium alone. Bai Xiao didn't lift a finger himself. He merely guided them, leading the way to a transport truck deep inside the base. Earlier, in the control room, he had opened the spillway channel. He recalled that Stryker had a son, still not retrieved, but Bai Xiao couldn't be bothered to go searching. He let the mutants pile into the truck. Food, water, and blankets were loaded along with them. Surprisingly, Deathstrike followed silently. Her sealed mind offered no resistance, just instinctive movement. Bai Xiao didn't stop her. He drove out with the convoy, arriving at a battered Ford SUV. One of the mutants who knew how to drive took the wheel, and together they followed the truck to a nearby abandoned house. Unload the supplies. Stack the blankets inside. Once the goods were in, Bai Xiao addressed the group. Someone will come for you soon. Stay here. You'll survive. Ignoring the grateful yet anxious looks from the mutants, he transferred the adamantium into his SUV, gave them one last glance, and left. That was the extent of his kindness. From there, he headed toward Alberta City. In a dim corner of an internet cafe, he found a computer and quickly pulled up the public contact information for Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. He typed up a short email detailing the coordinates of the rescued mutants near Alkali Lake, then hit send. Done. As for the adamantium, Bai Xiao arranged for it to be shipped to New York through a third-party forwarding company. He used a broker to mask the shipment's contents. Anything else, and it risked being seized as strategic military-grade material. The cost was steep, nearly emptied his current savings. Not that it mattered. He had already unlocked Stryker's private accounts using the fragments of memory he'd accessed earlier. The man had embezzled millions through military reimbursements, building this damn facility in secret. The operational costs alone were staggering. Now, over $10 million sat in an offshore account, and Bai Xiao had the password. He could access the money with ease. With his resources secured, his next goal became clear: magic. Without a proper storage space, carrying materials and supplies was a hassle. The desire to study mystical arts grew stronger. Canada had been a good move. He got the money, punished Stryker, and saved innocent lives. All of it left him strangely satisfied. Still, he didn't rush back to New York. Instead, he lingered in Alberta, touring its quiet towns while discreetly moving the funds into his own accounts. It wasn't an operation that could survive intense scrutiny. But would anyone even investigate? Would the military care enough to track down a rogue scientist-turned-thief? And even if they did, it would be too late. By then, the money would be gone. Now, Bai Xiao had power. He no longer needed to live in the shadows. At Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. The sun streamed warmly through the tall windows of the headmaster's office as Professor Charles Xavier wrapped up his lesson. That will be all for today. I hope each of you leaves with something new to think about, he said with a gentle smile. Goodbye, Professor. The students filed out, cheerful and polite. Jean Grey stepped in as they left, a note of urgency in her expression. Professor, she said, we just received an email. A group of rescued mutants was left near Alkali Lake in Alberta. The sender said they're still in danger. Charles's eyes glinted with concern. Let's find them, he said. Jean nodded and wheeled him toward a sealed chamber deep in the school, a place few even knew existed. Within was Cerebro, the most advanced brainwave amplifier on the planet, built with Magneto's help. Using it, Charles could expand his mental senses across the globe. He closed his eyes and focused. The search had begun. Crossing the floating platform suspended above the chamber, Jean Grey gently pushed Professor Charles Xavier toward the center. There, surrounded by glowing circuitry and metal framework, the professor reached out and lifted the signature metal helmet, Cerebro's interface. He lowered it over his head, and, as the system hummed to life, a wave of immense psychic energy surged outward like a silent explosion. Within moments, his mind expanded across continents. His consciousness scanned the mental landscape of the world, precisely honing in on a remote area near Alkali Lake in Alberta, Canada, the exact coordinates mentioned in the mysterious email. A pulse of emotion caught his attention, and he focused. Inside a derelict cabin, he found them, a small group of mutants, cold, hungry, afraid. Some were children, clinging tightly to the older ones for comfort. Their faces were pale and drawn, their auras full of unease. Charles let out a soft breath of relief. They're alive, not harmed. That's something. Then he spoke, not aloud, but through the power of his mind. Children, my name is Charles. I am here to help you. His voice, calm and fatherly, echoed within the minds of those huddled in the cabin. Startled, they looked around in confusion, wondering who had just spoken inside their heads. An older boy, perhaps 17, was the first to gather the courage to respond. Mr. Charles? Are you speaking to us? Yes, my child. Are you here to rescue us? I am. I'm a mutant too, like all of you. I run a school in New York, a place where mutants live safely, where you never have to hide again. The boy hesitated for a moment, then said softly, someone else told us something similar. We want to go, but what should we do? Just wait, Charles said warmly. I'm sending my students now. Stay where you are. It won't be long. I'll watch over you until they arrive. New York is far. It is, but we have a plane. Thank you. We'll wait here. As the mental link faded, Charles removed the helmet and turned to Jean, who stood waiting with quiet concern. There are children there, traumatized but safe. It's time to bring them home, he said gently. And there's more. That abandoned dam near Alkali Lake, it's Stryker's base. We missed it before. It's shielded psychically. That's how he stayed hidden. Jean's eyes widened. You're saying someone broke in? Charles nodded. Yes. Someone who knew exactly where to strike. Someone we've met before. He didn't say the name, but Jean understood. Stryker had long haunted their memories, experimenting on Logan, hunting mutants. And yet, the one who breached his fortress was not one of their own, but the boy Charles once feared might become a threat. A boy called by Xiao. The professor said nothing more about him, but in his mind, questions echoed. How did Bai Xiao know where to go? How did he bypass the psychic shielding? There was no time to dwell. The priority now was the children. Gather the team, Charles instructed, and be cautious. If the base is still active, there may be dangers we haven't accounted for. Jean nodded and turned to leave. Charles watched her go, a gentle but unreadable look on his face. So cautious, always calculating, yet afraid to trust, he mused quietly. What he hadn't told Jean was that, while using Cerebro, he had indeed sensed Bai Zhao's presence, distant but unmistakable. However, the boy's mind was surrounded by thick mental barriers, a fortress of willpower. Charles couldn't reach him unless invited. Any attempt to force contact would be invasive, even hostile. That wasn't the relationship Charles wanted. And yet, despite the emotional distance, the professor could sense something in Bai Xiao, a clear understanding of right and wrong, a deep-seated moral compass, a dangerous ally, perhaps, but not an enemy. Still, Charles remembered their first meeting in Chinatown. The cold glint in Bai Xiao's eyes, the disdain. Building trust will be difficult, maybe impossible. Meanwhile, back in New York, unaware of the old man's thoughts, Bai Xiao returned to his temporary residence. The massive slab of adamantium now stood before him in the center of the room, reflecting the overhead lights like a steel mirror. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He had tested it back in Alberta. Adamantium could withstand his compressed magical energy to a degree. It might make a decent weapon, but the strain of his power would warp it eventually. Perhaps a few uses before it cracked. Should I make a few? He wondered, but it felt like a waste. With his strength growing, such a weapon would quickly become obsolete. Adamantium was starting to feel irrelevant. Only vibranium might match my needs, he thought. Should I go to Wakanda? He shook his head. Forget it. I'll wait. A weapon that couldn't defeat stronger versions of himself and wasn't needed to handle weaker ones was simply impractical. Even Magneto would be more of a tactical nuisance than a threat. Maybe I'll visit Asgard someday. URU metal might be the answer. But for now, he had other priorities. Cleaning up the vampires plaguing New York was high on the list. Oddly, he had yet to come across any werewolves. Did the vampires drive them underground? Or worse, exterminate them? If so, that meant fewer experience points for him. A disappointment. With a frown, Bai Xiao made a mental note to investigate the city's supernatural balance. Something strange was going on, and he intended to find out what.
Hey, everyone! If you enjoy my quantum audiobooks, you can support me by becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me keep creating, and you'll get exclusive perks. You can also access my audiobooks directly through Google Drive. Check out the link in the description. Now, let's get started.
The steady downpour incessantly battered the windows of the house. Under the veil of night, a dim, yellowish glow emanated from the rooms inside the house, whose old furnishings and furniture indicated that its owner was not particularly wealthy. Through the window pane, one could vaguely discern not towering buildings but rows of irregularly growing trees by the roadside, clearly indicating that the location was not within the city, but rather on its outskirts. Inside the house, a faint groan was audible. In the living room, a tall figure clad in a black coat extended his hand and, with a grip strong as iron, clutched another figure by the neck, slamming him violently against the wall and lifting him off the floor. "Please, I beg you, don't do this." The man, whose throat was tightly grasped, pleaded in terror. His body was robust and muscular, likely due to regular physical training or laborious work. His slightly curly blonde hair and pale skin, along with his light blue eyes filled with fear, were evident. He could hardly believe what had happened before. In front of this man, his own strength seemed as negligible as that of a child, utterly powerless to resist. He recognized the person before him as someone akin to a grim reaper. Under the dim yellow light, his dark skin, black leather coat, and the long sword he carried on his back were illuminated. Why? The man's deep voice filled the frightened, muscular man with confusion. What? Lately, I've been unable to find you lot, the kind who, like foul-smelling rats, used to infest the city. But recently you've ceased your activities. What are you hiding from? What has driven you to do this? I need to know. With a grim smile, the muscular man revealed sharp teeth, confirming his identity as a vampire. A man like you, a daywalker. During your absence, another fearsome figure has been hunting us down. He has a scent-tracking ability like that of a hunting dog, able to locate all of us, then slaughtering us. 3 vampire clans have been massacred, powerless to resist. So, you fled the city out of fear, the man known as the Daywalker interrupted. Yes, he's a butcher, his methods far crueler and more terrifying than yours. Any vampire he targets cannot escape. We who have no clan to rely on had to flee the city and survive barely on the blood of animals. Shivering, the muscular man spoke of the butcher, his face undisguised with fear, deeper even than what he felt for the daywalker before him. Even the mere mention of the name drained him of courage. An interesting person, another vampire hunter? The daywalker's face cracked a grim smile. Interesting? He's an executioner, daywalker. No vampire can escape his gaze, and all, young and old, will die by his hand. Don't forget, you're a vampire too, the muscular man said with a bitter laugh. Hearing this, the daywalker showed no fear or dread, merely gazing at the vampire before him and softly saying, "Goodbye." As he finished speaking, his other hand thrust a silver-dusted short sword into the muscular man's heart. In the next moment, with a terrible scream, the vampire burst into flames and smoke, burning until he was reduced to ashes. After killing the vampire, the daywalker coldly turned and walked towards the door, leaving the house. Outside, a black Ford muscle car was parked. He opened the car door, sat down, put on sunglasses, and drove away from the scene, leaving no one else to know that a vampire had just quietly perished in this remote location. Driving on, the car entered a garage on the west of New York. In the rain, he got out of the car, indifferent to the rain soaking him, and entered the garage filled with various customized motorcycles, sports cars, and equipment for forging weapons. Seems you're in a good mood, Blade. Did you find the answers you were looking for? At the center of the garage, an old man with white hair, holding a modified short shotgun, watched as his vigilant expression faded. Blade took off his black leather coat, revealing a tight undershirt and strong muscles, and hung his sword on a nearby rack. A man like me appeared during this time, massacring those scum, causing them to flee the city in fear. Blade casually picked up a newly forged weapon from a nearby metal table, inspecting it as he spoke. The old man was surprised. Although I've noticed someone very active recently, I didn't expect it to be this, a new vampire hunter. I've never heard of such a top hunter coming to New York, and it seems his scent is even sharper than yours, Blade. I don't know his identity, but he's not from the hunter circles. Why so sure? No hunter operating alone has ever managed to instill such fear in the vampire population of New York, causing them to flee simultaneously. Such scenario has never happened before. Blade frowned as he spoke. Vampires are a species known for their resilience and ability to reproduce. They excel at concealing themselves in the darkness and possess an ancient history. They have learned harsh lessons from numerous wars, as human weaponry has grown increasingly powerful. Knowing that spreading like a virus to dominate the world would not work, vampires have learned to hide among people. With the existence of vampires, naturally, hunters would emerge. However, hunters have never been the predominant force. The idea that the presence of a single hunter could cause all vampires in a city to flee out of fear was unimaginable even to Blade himself. If such a hunter truly existed, he would be well known within the hunter circles. Thus, this person must have a different identity. Okay, so it's his fault that I'm out of job now. The old man spread his hands in resignation, though his tone conveyed joy. As an old vampire hunter, he couldn't resist the ravages of time, but his lifelong dream was to completely eradicate vampires from the human world. That was the purpose of his existence. For this, he was willing to die on the path of hunting vampires, and he never regretted it. However, the old man then looked worriedly towards Blade. That guy made so many vampires flee New York, and he's not even from our circle. What if he finds you? Blade was an unexpected offspring, a hybrid of human and vampire. Known as a daywalker, he differed from other vampires in that he was not afraid of the sunlight. Though essentially still a vampire, he possessed powers and speed that matched or even surpassed those of other vampires. Everyone in the hunter circle was aware of Blade, the anomaly. While many were probably cautious around Blade, at least their positions were aligned. They wouldn't start fighting upon meeting. But that man might not be aware of these facts, and if one day he encountered Blade, thinking of this possibility, the old man couldn't help but frown. "Don't worry, Whistler. I'm a hunter, not a prey," Blade responded nonchalantly. He was a proud man, always believing in himself. Even though that man had recently racked up impressive feats, surprising him, he still believed in himself. Such misunderstandings can be avoided. There's no need for accidents to happen, the old man insisted. It looks like I need to go see some old friends, or maybe get some information from them. Suit yourself. Blade did not stop the old man from doing everything for his sake. Their relationship never required pretense or evasion. Blade was more curious about that man. Perhaps all the information he sought was with him. This led him to recall the ancient vampire script he had seen on old parchments, which had left him shocked, and thus he had left New York to follow clues. Now, with the situation in turmoil, the clues he sought might have fallen into that man's hands. What do those things actually represent? There's a ritual described there, the descent of the blood god. I've told you everything. Atop a high-rise in New York, featuring a swimming pool, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a bar, the ash on the floor was enough proof of why the place was deserted. Dressed in a black coat and inner lining, wearing a round hat like an elegant gentleman, Bai Xiao said politely to the vampire elder who lay collapsed on the floor with severed legs. Although it's not necessary, I still appreciate your answers. Goodbye. As he finished speaking, he extended his hand and a fine laser beam shot out, striking the despairing vampire elder on the forehead. As if hit by solar energy, the elder burst into flames without even a scream, completely incinerated. A summoning of the blood god? Looks like a boss has appeared. A smile played on by Zhao's lips. Since returning to New York, he had been intensively striking out, almost turning the city inside out. With his psychic powers, tracking these vampires was too easy. As a result, 3 deeply hidden vampire families in New York were completely wiped out. He had probably killed over 3,000 vampires in the past month, not counting the lowly vampire minions. Compared to a month ago, he felt his strength had increased more than threefold, and even then, he had been at a very high level, almost reaching the ceiling set by people like the Ancient One. Now his strength has tripled again. Now he could confidently say that, aside from the Ancient One, there was basically no one on Earth who could match him. The vitality in his cells, the magic growing within him, he felt it nearly overflowing, though that was merely an illusion as there was no upper limit to his cell count. Desire for more gains was still strong in him, though, as he still felt he was far behind the Sky Father level of Odin. Even Thor in his current phase should be easy to handle, despite Thor's naturally strong foundation. So Bai Xiao was not satisfied yet. He could feel that the experience from vampires was diminishing as he grew. Only vampires with a larger base and pure bloodlines could bring substantial life essence. This was fortunate, as the so-called upcoming boss would be a significant source of experience. For this, he discreetly allowed the remaining vampires to flee the city, just waiting for the day the boss would descend. As for whether he could defeat the boss, he had not considered it. His gains this month were not just substantial life essence, but also magical power, the nature of which Bai Xiao had yet to analyze, though he knew that this magic was like a panacea. Besides healing, it also possessed a potent destructive property. Injected into a vampire's body, it could produce effects as lethal as the sunlight, if not more brutal. Even a tiny amount injected into a vampire with pure bloodlines would cause them to die faster and more gruesomely, like a spark igniting an oil barrel. Initially, when he hunted vampires, he hadn't developed the use of this magic, causing him to miss this aspect. As a result, the silver weapons at home were now gathering dust. He was fundamentally a counter to this so-called blood god. The advantage was his. Even if he couldn't overcome the blood god, wasn't the Ancient One still a safety net? If the blood god truly posed a significant threat, the Ancient One would surely intervene. So far, there had been no move from her, which essentially amounted to tacit approval. Bai Xiao was used to making bold moves by now. He didn't lack this one time. He muttered to himself, secure in the knowledge that he had the Ancient One figured out. Nothing could stop him, not even Jesus. The result of Bai Xiao's massive killing spree was that many large-scale disappearances occurred in New York. Yet, the NYPD received no information whatsoever. Even Bai Xiao's other alias, the Rainy Night Butcher, vanished without a trace. No cases of gang massacres have been reported in Queens since then, nor in other parts of New York. Primarily, Bai Zhao's initial targets shifted from gangs to vampires. After all, one would naturally grind where the experience points are plentiful. The tiny bit of life essence from ordinary people no longer caught his eye. So, without his intervention as the Rainy Night Butcher, wouldn't the number of massacres decrease? Although he killed many vampires this month, the vampires he found barely had the capacity to resist, which brings us to the use of psychic powers. Bai Zhao's process was straightforward. Locate a vampire gathering. Use psychic powers to take control of the scene. If there were innocent people, he'd use mental suggestions to make them leave and manipulate the vampires to wait for their doom. Once the civilians left, his several waves of magic would turn the vampires to ash, and he'd take the opportunity to remove the surveillance tapes as usual. There were no witnesses, no gunshots, and his efficiency in killing was exceptionally high, causing hardly any uproar. So it didn't stir up even a ripple. One must admit, psychic power is extremely useful, whether against ordinary people or slightly stronger-willed vampires. It's a powerful tool for controlling the scene. Once he settled down, the NYPD was at a loss. Because 2 months ago, when the murderer ceased his activities, they conducted a massive search and found absolutely no clues. The few suspicious individuals they found were ex-military, but they all had solid alibis and were physically impaired. Such people couldn't possibly have slaughtered over 200 gunmen. Moreover, Simon, the precinct chief of Queens, found it more troubling that the FBI Joint Investigation Team had withdrawn, leaving only 2 agents behind. Although they continued to investigate earnestly, he felt they had already given up on this case. Simon felt his career as precinct chief was over. Regardless of the Butcher's rising popularity nationwide, with many followers, it was irrelevant to him. At least in this super serial killing case, Simon had not demonstrated satisfactory capability, and though his resignation was not imminent due to the FBI's involvement, the stain of being criticized for incompetence remained. Compared to resignation, this was much better, yet Simon was still somewhat infuriated, leading him to increase his visits to the Joint Investigation Team's meeting room. However, the pressure on the members of the Joint Investigation Team, though considerable, was virtually non-existent compared to Simon's. They had gathered the elite detectives from all over New York State. If everyone couldn't find any leads, they bore little responsibility. As long as the Butcher ceased his crimes, they could just treat it as a cold case and file it away. After all, hasn't New York filed away many such unsolved cases over the years? The officers involved in the original investigations were not to blame. Those off duty would leave work. However, some members of the investigation team noticed that Chief George seemed busy with something lately. He appeared distracted and absent-minded every day at work. His colleagues had asked him about it, but Chief George brushed it off, mentioning some family issues. His colleagues realized and offered some comfort, not prying further, as it was a personal matter. That day, as George was about to leave work in the evening with a determined look, ready to get in his car, he happened to encounter FBI agent Carlson, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, chatting with 2 other FBI agents. George had a good impression of the mild-mannered Carlson, who was very professional and didn't meddle unnecessarily. But then he remembered something else, his gaze flickering. He didn't rush to get into his car, but waited until Carlson finished briefing the 2 agents before approaching to greet him. "Hey, Carlson." "Hey, George, long time no see." Carlson, noticing George's worn-out look, said, "George, you look much more worn out than before. You might need to be careful." "Yeah, I've been a bit overheated lately." George didn't elaborate further, but looked at Carlson, casually asking, "Have you and Agent Natasha withdrawn from the Joint Investigation Team recently?" "We have other assignments, and with you capable elites here, missing us too isn't a problem, but we must follow our superiors' orders, right?" Carlson's expression remained gentle, but his eyes were observing George. "Indeed, it's good to see you again, Carlson. See you next time." "Same here, goodbye, George." Carlson stood still, watching as George turned to get into his car and drove away from the police station, furrowing his brow slightly. Did he notice something? How'd he find out? After pondering, Coulson also got into his car and drove toward Long Island. The drive was long, and it took a while before he reached a building on Long Island. After parking the car, he entered the building. The building was bustling with many people, including colleagues who recognized Coulson and nodded in greeting without much conversation. The atmosphere was very disciplined. Coulson passed through several card swipes and verifications to reach the elevator, which took him up to the floor he had in mind. The elevator doors opened, and he followed the clean, high-tech corridor to an office, knocking on the door. A deep voice came from inside. "Come in." Coulson opened the door to see a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end, where his direct superior, Director Nick Fury, sat in an office chair. "Sir, someone at the NYPD has discovered the target's identity." Nick Fury, a bald African-American man who prefers wearing a black leather trench coat and sports an eye patch over his left eye, was deeply engrossed in paperwork when he heard Coulson's words and looked up in surprise, setting aside his work. "Explain the situation." "Our agents discovered a month ago that George, the police chief of the Queens precinct, was acting unusually. They learned that George had been inquiring about me and Natasha from Simon. Following up, they found that George had been near the target's home and had asked the neighbors about the target. He's also gathering this information. After they reported to me, I went to the police station today and bumped into George. After a brief conversation, I confirmed that he was suspicious of me and Natasha." "How did he determine the target's identity?" "That is currently unknown, but it seems to be just an accident, and he is likely still just suspicious," Coulson replied. "If that's the case, I'd assume he would submit these clues to the joint investigation team and then start a comprehensive investigation of the target. Wouldn't he?" Nick Fury, with his hands crossed under his chin, pointed out the doubts. After pondering for a moment, Coulson answered, "Perhaps he doesn't trust it. After all, the way the target has been raised is still untraceable to us. If Natasha hadn't observed him firsthand, we probably wouldn't believe it either. Or maybe deep down he doesn't want the boy to be caught. Clearly, he subconsciously approves of the boy's actions," Fury affirmed confidently. Coulson's gaze shifted, recalling his interactions with George. He knew George as a family man who loathed criminals and was extremely compassionate. He is undoubtedly a good man. Such a person would behave irrationally, as the chief had described. Then, recalling his previous encounters with George, from his determined gaze, Coulson realized he plans to take the information he's gathered home, submit it to the joint investigation team, and officially start the investigation of the target. George is a good person and also a good cop. He has the awareness of a policeman, believing that crimes should be adjudicated by law. His subconscious may approve of Bai Zhao's actions, and he might hesitate, but ultimately, his police duty overcomes any hesitation. Trust your own judgment. Coulson, go do your work, and Natasha will cooperate with you. We need the target to remain stable enough to continue observing him, analyzing the logic and thinking behind all his actions. I want to get the most accurate assessment of his character," Fury replied without hesitation. "Do you want to recruit him?" Coulson hesitated, but finally asked. Although this action contradicts the principles of an agent, he was still concerned. Fury has always maintained trust in his old partner. Although this trust is relatively more compared to other agents, as his nature is to be skeptical of everyone around him, keeping his subordinates close. But he understood Coulson's character and his concerns. Fury pondered for a moment, hummed at the desk, and the highest authority privacy function in the office was activated. He then said to Coulson, "Both of us have lived through the events of 1995, which taught us that Earth is not alone. There are civilizations, technologies, and races far beyond our era in the universe. This also means that crises have never left us. Coulson, we need more support. We need a last line of defense when a crisis hits." The document you once submitted to the Security Council, Coulson realized. 2 years after that incident erupted, Nick Fury had submitted a document to the United Nations Security Council named the Avengers, detailing the Avengers' situation and the need for a powerful force to counteract future massive crises or wars. That is the Avengers. But it was rejected, and despite Fury's repeated submissions, it never gained support. so the document was archived, and Coulson had since forgotten it. Now, the words Fury was speaking to him were clearly preparations for establishing the Avengers. Its establishment requires the right candidates. But all these years I've been searching and haven't found anyone. Nick Fury said meaningfully, then stopped. But Coulson clearly knew what was to follow. The Rainy Night Butcher had been on the chief's watch list from the beginning, initially considered for recruitment into the department. But after Natasha's observation and contact, the chief's thinking had clearly changed. The power demonstrated by the target was not within the ordinary human scope. Someone with such abilities had already been quietly included in the Avengers candidate list by the chief, which is why the chief had decided to use resources and power to keep everything about that boy hidden. This was also to prepare for continued observation and recruitment. In fact, many agents followed this process. But Coulson had never thought the chief would plan to restart the Avengers, much less that he would tell him so. Nick Fury did not elaborate further, but turned off the device and let Coulson leave. After Coulson left, Nick Fury stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the night scene below, a deep glint in his one eye. He could speak these words to Coulson because Coulson would also be part of this plan, not as a member of the Avengers, but as a liaison with the department. Fury was unsure whether the Avengers could be successfully established, but once established, he could not let the Avengers be under government control, nor could he let them run free. He needed a trusted person to participate fully in the establishment of the Avengers, to replace him in overseeing and fulfilling other duties. John Shaw, Fury murmured, and after a while, there was a knock at the door. As the door opened, a woman in a Kevlar agent uniform with wine-red hair and a fine physique, the unmistakable features of Natasha, walked in. "Sir, any results?" Fury turned to look at this top agent, who had only joined the department a few years ago, his tone as usual. "The mission with Hawkeye has been resolved, and he's wrapping things up over there." Natasha stood erect like a soldier, her robust demeanor unmistakable. "Well done, Natasha. You have 10 days off." Fury nodded in satisfaction. Though initially he was bent on eliminating this woman, during Hawkeye's mission, he discovered this once notorious Russian spy's slightly tragic past and experiences, and gave her a test mission, which she completed excellently. Over the years, she had executed many difficult missions perfectly. Thus, she also became one of the top agents in the department. Fury was also satisfied with his decision. Generously, Fury gave her 10 days off, but Natasha was not so happy, and Fury immediately discerned her thoughts. "Natasha, sir, I have a question. About John Shaw?" Fury quietly looked at Natasha, who nodded. "Also about vampires. I've been monitoring his movements and the recent events in New York after my departure. That strange death scene might involve a creature I never believed existed." "Vampires." Fury provided the answer. Natasha frowned slightly. "Has the director always known? Records of vampires have always been kept, just sealed off for some reasons, inaccessible with your clearance." Fury did not deny, but confirmed it. Vampires and werewolves could even be traced back to the Middle Ages. Although these species are deeply hidden, it does not mean that the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division could not detect them. However, the behind-the-scenes involve a series of trade and resource swaps. He also received instructions from the previous director to let them be, provided they don't cross the line. He was reluctant and even conducted quite a few targeted studies behind the scenes, but ultimately, he could not take action openly. Since the vampires kept a relatively low profile, at least not threatening public opinion and stability, they could be ignored. This highest-level secret was only known to a very few, and Natasha, being new, was even less aware. After Coulson reported that Bai Xiao had created silver-coated weapons, Fury knew Bai Xiao must have also detected the vampire's presence, but he still silently observed, or rather, it was also a test of the other's capabilities and temperament. After the Stonewall Bar incident, Fury finally confirmed to include him in the Avengers recruitment list. The discovery and destruction, Bai Xiao's abilities and character perfectly matched Fury's philosophy. Fury has always believed that the world should be led by humans. He was not capable of advancing humanity's progress himself, but human progress required a stable and harmonious period. Any species that threatened this stability and peace was a potential threat. Fury was very satisfied with Bai Zhao's execution, especially since discovering the vampires. He focused solely on that, even foregoing his previous enthusiasm for combating crime. Fury liked such a person. Isn't that the perfect Avenger template? Otherwise, Fury would not have helped Bai Zhao to cover up actively. With the initial investment, the subsequent recruitment would be smoother. Of course, his thoughts were somewhat wishful, but Fury believed it was only a matter of time. Fury's thoughts, Natasha was unaware of. She just felt her worldview refreshed again. Mutants had appeared since World War II, and although there were many powerful mutants exceeding standards, at least in her view, they were still humans, at most genetically mutated. But vampires and werewolves, those should only exist in movies and novels. The transition from legend to reality was somewhat shocking to her. Natasha's will was strong enough, and along with prior suspicions, she calmed down after a brief shock, unable to see her direct superior's heart, yet clear that he was aware of such a species, thus certainly prepared in secret. I need you to keep this highly confidential, Natasha. You know the agency regulations. Understood, goodbye, sir. Natasha received her answer and left cleanly. On her way out, Natasha began to think about preparing some silver weapons for herself, just in case she encountered vampires during a mission. Without weapons to counter, it would be too dangerous. She didn't want to die young or become a vampire. All those handsome and charming vampires in movies and dramas held no interest for her. Natasha preferred to remain human. With not many vampires left in New York, Bai Zhao also entered a vacation period. During the break, he used the money he got from Stryker to buy several apartments in other areas. Of course, they were rentals. He also bought a single apartment in Queens, totaling no more than $1.5 million, including the purchase tax, to temporarily enhance his quality of life. As for mansions, he simply didn't have enough money for villas and estates. Living alone in such luxury, and without a mistress, he was even less interested. A single apartment was already sufficient. Located on Forest Hills 75th Street in Queens, it wasn't far from his original apartment, with a subway station within a 10-minute walk. Although he hardly used it, the apartment environment was very nice, a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1 living room, 1 kitchen apartment. While not luxuriously decorated, it was clean and cozy. Modern decor, bright walls, and fully furnished. The spacious living room and sofa arrangement also had a minimalist style. Additionally, the surrounding environment was excellent, true to the literal meaning of Forest Hills, with plenty of vegetation, broad driveways, and paths flanked by trees. Even the houses were surrounded by vegetation, giving a natural feel of living in a primeval forest. Because the neighborhood was predominantly upper-middle class, cleaners maintained and trimmed the vegetation daily. The setting is quite pleasant, a quiet place with few people around. Even for an ordinary American citizen, living here would be considered above average, with a happy family life. This house will accompany him for a long time. After paying off the new house, Bai Zhao has no plans to do anything with the old house. He just leaves it there, too lazy to sell it. After moving into the new home, Bai Zhao felt quite pleased. The second floor of the apartment has a balcony with a table and chairs. Wearing a white wool sweater, sweatpants, and slippers, he made himself a glass of orange juice and sat down to enjoy the view of towering trees in front and the occasional passerby on the street below, feeling content. Here, you rarely hear the noisy honking of car horns. All you hear are birds and other animal sounds. Enjoying this moment of peace, time swiftly passed. A week in which Bai Zhao did nothing but continue to accumulate the knowledge he was supposed to learn. He knows that the knowledge left by human civilization is never worthless. Humans are the same. In terms of accumulating knowledge, one can never have too much. During this time, he did not buy groceries as often as before because his need for food was not as great. Initially, he needed to consume a lot of nutrients due to a significant deficiency. Besides, the stronger the physical constitution and the higher the level of life, the more food is needed just to maintain bodily and brain functions, purely from a human anatomical perspective. This was always the case for Bai Xiao. Several comprehensive enhancements improved his physical condition and developed his brain function, which also required a lot of nutrients to maintain. After the birth of magic, this versatile magical force could substitute for nutrients to sustain his movement and brain energy needs. The higher the level of life, the more this is the case. For example, beings like Odin and the Ancient One, in their level of battles that last not just hours but days or even months. How could they survive such lengthy battles without eating or drinking? At that level, the stronger the life level, the less need there is for external nutrients. Even if they eat, it's just for the pleasure of taste, unless the food itself contains vast amounts of energy to nourish oneself. It's worth mentioning that the Ancient One's physical strength is not as great as Odin's at the same level, but her spiritual strength and mastery of magic are incredibly powerful. A strong soul can influence the body, reaching the same level as a celestial being. Not to mention these two. Even Thor has begun to be able to fight for long periods without eating, also due to his lineage and divine power, but hunger will still follow, which is not contradictory. Bai Xiao also took this path. He would still eat as usual to satisfy his normal culinary desires, enjoying the momentary impact on his taste buds from cooked food, which is also a wonderful experience. Humans always cherish such delightful moments. Within a week, Bai Xiao also received a message from two vampire elders under his control, say that a vampire with a very pure bloodline had learned of the Bible's content and, along with other vampires and members of the New York Vampire Elder Council, planned to build a summoning altar to prepare for summoning the blood god. The real reason is to reclaim their lost stronghold. In fact, every city has its own territory, and New York, being particularly special, is the most coveted among all territories worldwide, occupied by vampire families with vast influence and heritage. Compared to other vampire factions, these are the most noble. However, due to Bai Xiao's arrival, they were forcibly expelled from New York, a tremendous humiliation for these vampire families. With their interests and reputations damaged, and many high-ranking vampires slaughtered, it would be strange if they could sit still. But they couldn't just contact other vampire families, as the weakened ones would easily be devoured by others. Fortunately, the appearance of the Book of Death gave these vampire families new hope. They united, vowing to fight their way back into New York and to flay and dismember Bai Xiao. As for the message from the two traitorous vampire elders, he could only silently applaud, even cheering them on from behind. Others might see a disaster unfolding, but he saw it as a massive pool of life essence. For this, he specifically instructed the two traitorous vampire elders to diligently complete the construction of the altar and then wait for him to reap the benefits. Bai Xiao was in high spirits, but when he went out to throw away the trash, he encountered an unpleasant situation. That day, as he carried a bag of trash to the communal dumpster and had just finished disposing of it, he suddenly felt a weak but intense gaze piercing toward him. This was not like the casual glance of an ordinary person. This gaze was filled with murderous intent and malice. He remained calm and turned his head toward the source of the gaze. About 1,000 meters down the road, an inconspicuous black sedan was parked on the side of the road, and the driver, wearing a cap and staring intently at him. Suddenly, Bai Xiao turned his head and locked eyes with the driver, who seemed shocked that Bai Xiao could spot him from such a distance and appeared to scarcely believe it. It was quite interesting. After being discovered, the driver did not choose to drive away immediately, but instead drove towards Bai Xiao. Bai Xiao just quietly watched. When the driver reached where Bai Xiao was on the roadside and stopped, the man got out of the car, confidently approached Bai Xiao, and looked him over unabashedly. "Nice to meet you, butcher." The man was dressed simply and modestly. Just a common black jacket and pants, topped with a baseball cap, and a rugged face with a neatly trimmed beard around his chin and upper lip. His body was lean and muscular, and his fierce demeanor made him appear unapproachable, especially those eyes filled with aggression. Ordinarily, most people would be intimidated or dislike such aggressive eyes, But Bai Xiao, being scrutinized by them, showed no signs of impatience or anger. Instead, he was very calm. However, beneath this calm often lurked a terrible storm. Just like Bai Xiao now. His eyes met those of the man, his black pupils as deep as an abyss, seemingly ready to devour souls at any moment. This man, under Bai Xiao's gaze, felt a surge of fear within. His eyes wandered uncontrollably, no longer meeting Bai Xiao's. Finally, the man suppressed the fear rising instinctively within him and forced himself to meet Bai Xiao's gaze again. Very impressive eyes. Go back and tell Kingpin, if my identity is revealed, I will burn his so-called empire to the ground, and then death will be a luxury for you. Bai Xiao set a subtle mental suggestion in this man's mind with his powerful psychic abilities. As he finished speaking, he turned and walked towards his apartment. As for the man, he stared intensely at Bai Xiao's departing figure. Normally defiant, if anyone else had spoken those words to him, he would have responded with brutal violence. But now, he lacked even the courage to act. Those tranquil pupils haunted his mind, making him feel as though his body was no longer under his control. Damn it! After Bai Xiao entered the apartment and closed the door, the man cursed under his breath, angrily kicked the tire of a car, and then walked to the driver's side, furiously driving away. He knew that the moment fear emerged, he had already lost, and it was a bitter loss. The opponent was too powerful, suffocatingly so, leaving him without the courage to fight. So wisely he left. However, this incident was far from over. As the man drove away, his face gradually twisted into a ferocious expression. This minor episode did not affect Bai Xiao. In fact, when the man was discovered by Bai Xiao, his memories had already been accessed. Bai Xiao never cared for such trivial matters as privacy concerning someone with hostile intentions towards him. He could mention Kingpin's name and naturally knew the man's identity. A top mercenary, an assassin, one of the major mob bosses in New York sent by Kingpin to recruit him. Bullseye, with strong individual combat capabilities, was also one of the greatest enemies of Daredevil. Kingpin was the same, a formidable figure, who, upon learning of the slaughter in Queens and the power displayed, wanted to recruit him and thus sent Bullseye to investigate and locate him. But neither Kingpin nor Bullseye ever considered one thing. In their view, Bai Xiao was just another player like Bullseye, a top assassin, a warrior, but they couldn't imagine how fast Bai Xiao was growing. He had already surpassed ordinary humans. The so-called business empire, the mob career, in Bai Xiao's eyes were now like child's play, of no interest, making Kingpin merely a piggy bank to him. He hadn't sought out Kingpin, yet the latter had approached him first, which Bai Xiao found somewhat amusing. Bullseye wasn't killed because he was already doomed. After dealing a big blow to Kingpin, the mental suggestion Bai Xiao set would make Bullseye end his own life. Bai Xiao couldn't be bothered to deal with Kingpin himself, considering a fat man could offer so little life essence. Better to keep him as a piggy bank. Regardless of how much money Kingpin's business empire made, it was all being prepared for him. As for how Bullseye found him, Bai Xiao was neither surprised nor concerned, focusing solely on awaiting the descent of the Blood God. Bullseye drove to the Hell's Kitchen building of Kingpin, ignored the security and staff, and took the elevator to Kingpin's office. He knocked on the door, and Kingpin's voice came from inside. "Come in." Pushing open the door, he saw the spacious and luxurious office. Kingpin standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in a white suit, talking to a man in his 30s wearing glasses. Bullseye knew this man's identity, James Wesley, also Kingpin's most trusted and capable assistant. After James Wesley and Kingpin finished their work summary, he stood aside. "I failed." Bullseye approached Kingpin and said solemnly, That's an interesting piece of news. Did you kill him?" Kingpin, holding a cigar and leaning on a cane, asked with interest. "No, Bullseye wanted to say more, but then his eyes suddenly changed. A tremendous psychic power inexplicably burst forth, and in Kingpin's view, the world in front of him suddenly twisted into darkness and chaos. Kingpin, as the most ruthless mob boss, had a far stronger mindset and will than ordinary people. He didn't panic or fear, but stood frowning. At that moment, in the dark world, a pair of huge eyes appeared, cold and merciless, as if a deity was looking down on mortals. Butcher, feeling the presence of these eyes, Kingpin immediately sensed it and looked up, saying solemnly, "We can talk." Kingpin tried to communicate, but a huge voice like a bell boomed in his ears. "You should hope I forget you, Kingpin." The voice sounded like a demonic roar, shaking Kingpin so intensely that severe, bone-piercing pain surged through his brain. It was unclear how much time had passed before the pain slowly dissipated. As the chaotic darkness faded from his sight, he returned to reality. What appeared before him next made Kingpin's plump face fill with gloom and shock. He saw, right before him, Bullseye, who had been standing there, was now lying in a pool of blood with visible wounds on his forehead and chest, disbelief filling his eyes. Kingpin slightly raised his hand and saw a handgun in it, appearing at some unknown time. Beside him, James Wesley staggered back a few steps, his eyes filled with horror, seemingly clueless as to why Kingpin would suddenly go mad and kill Bullseye he had personally recruited. "So, is this a warning to me?" Kingpin muttered through the cigar, clenched in his teeth. "Fist just now." James Wesley calmed himself and looked at Kingpin, hesitating to speak. But before he could finish, a noisy commotion came from outside the door. James Wesley turned to look and then glanced at Kingpin's grim face, silent. He walked to the office door, opened it, and saw a gunman crowded outside, ready to storm in at any moment. Obviously, they too had heard the gunfire and thought something had happened in Kingpin's office, eager to burst in. "Come in, the rest of you out." As Kingpin's capable assistant, James Wesley held a position of authority over the gunman. With a few words, he quelled the disturbance, signaling 2 gunmen to enter the office. The 2 gunmen entered and saw Bullseye dead in a pool of blood, a bullet wound in his forehead, confirming his death. Looking again at the grim-faced boss holding a gun, they were almost scared breathless. Fortunately, James Wesley directed them to carry the dead Bullseye down to the building's freezer for preservation. The 2 did not dare to glance at Kingpin as they hurriedly carried the body out of the office. Once the door closed again, James Wesley continued to look at Kingpin, uncertain, and said, "What happened between you two? Fisk, why did you suddenly kill Bullseye?" He couldn't understand why Kingpin had suddenly taken the gun from Bullseye and shot him in the head and chest without mercy, his expression as cold as if he was a puppet controlled by someone else. Moreover, it was even stranger that Bullseye had not resisted, just quietly waiting for the bullets to come. And with Bullseye's personality, he was just a mercenary recruited by Kingpin, completing missions for a bounty as Kingpin commanded. They had worked closely over the years, and Kingpin had often said that Bullseye would be one of his most capable assistants. However, today Bullseye had come to the office, said something to Kingpin, who responded with a gunshot, a development that baffled him. "Butcher." Kingpin turned and walked to his desk, casually placing the gun on it and crushing his cigar in the ashtray before looking at James Wesley and uttering a word. "Butcher?" "The Butcher from Queens." James Wesley asked, puzzled. Bullseye's mission this time was to find the Butcher, recruit him, or kill him if that failed. James Wesley suddenly understood. Everything that had happened between Kingpin and Bullseye made sense, but then he became even more puzzled, as all of this was normal. Then, that Butcher somehow took control of me and Bullseye. This is his warning to me, James. Kingpin's plump face grew more fierce, and the anger in his eyes seemed to burn everything in sight. "He's provoking me," especially as he kept recalling that phrase. "You should hope I forget you, Kingpin." That phrase was like daggers piercing his heart, making it bleed, a tremendous insult. How could Kingpin, now one of New York's biggest mob bosses, not be furious? He had always controlled the fates of others. Never had anyone dared to mock him as the Butcher had, his disdainful and cold words like a deity regarding an ant that could be crushed at any moment. The anger nearly drove Kingpin to madness. "Fisk." After James Wesley clarified everything, he looked at Kingpin, his expression serious and earnest. "Should I remind you? Anger is the beginning of the descent into the abyss." Kingpin's rage was cooled by James Wesley's words, like a bucket of cold water dousing his fury, allowing reason to regain control. His heaving chest calmed down, and he slowly sat in his office chair, closing his eyes, while James Wesley stood by, watching until a minute later, Kingpin reopened his eyes. "Anger is the beginning of a man's march towards death." He repeated the phrase, then burst out laughing, his robust laughter echoing through the entire spacious office. James Wesley finally sighed in relief, understanding both his employer and friend. He knew that Kingpin had regained his composure. "Thank you for your reminder, my friend. I'm glad you've always stood by my side," Kingpin said earnestly to James Wesley. The latter shook his head. "You know, I never like to get involved in these things, but the business empire needs a commune to support it. If you lose yourself to anger, then as per our agreement from the past, I will leave you." Kingpin nodded, looking towards the bloodstain on the carpet in front of him, and spoke in a low voice, "I never lack patience, James. Time will prove everything, and no one can humiliate me in this way, not even a godlike figure like the Butcher. Our game has just begun. I'm looking forward to the moment he kneels before me." "I'm also waiting to see it," James Wesley said with a smile, recognizing the calm, bloodthirsty, and patient Kingpin he knew. "I need someone who can clear up my doubts. I want to know how he managed to control me in Bullseye." Kingpin's eyes were filled with seriousness. "It just so happens I can put you in touch with someone," James Wesley replied. "A farm is located a dozen kilometers outside of New York. The farm spans a vast area, encircled by forests and embracing an ancient yet sizable manor surrounded by extensive fields. However, the area appears somewhat eerie and desolate, as it has been long abandoned. Inside the dark, spooky manor, furniture is overturned, and numerous bullet holes are visible, with the smell of gunpowder narrating a recent fierce battle. Piles of unidentifiable ashes accumulate on the wooden floor. Blade, wearing his unchanged outfit of years, a black trench coat, tight-fitting inner lining, and leather pants, with sunglasses over his eyes, holds a sharp sword in his hand. Expressionless, he pierces the last vampire in front of him. This young and handsome vampire screams tragically as he self-immolates into ashes, leaving behind only his final curse. When the blood god descends, you and those hunters will be torn apart. You will become a sacrifice, Blade. I look forward to your ultimate demise." Blade flicks his sword in a flourish, sheathing it behind his back, and turns to look at the white-haired old man entering from behind, carrying a specially made short-barreled shotgun and fully armed. "Did you hear that?" he shouted so loudly. "Although my hearing is impaired, it doesn't mean I can't hear, Blade. Do you think what he said is true?" "Whistler." A sharp glint flashes in Blade's eyes behind his sunglasses. The old man shakes his head. "I'm reluctant to believe such things, but we have already destroyed 4 of these bastards' gathering places, and their statements have been consistent. I think it's very likely true. It's really haunting. I thought I was going to be laid off, but now such things are still happening." The Book of Death mentioned in the records attracts these struggling vampires. They are indeed building altars for the summoning ritual. Blade remains silent, and the old man glances at him, sensing his unease. "What do you feel?" "A deep unease." Blade speaks gravely. "They are delaying our steps, Whistler." The old man frowns. "Do you think these gathering places were intentionally found by us? Previously, they avoided me at all costs and hid actively, but now, having been driven out, not only have they not left the vicinity of New York, but they have also created several gathering places nearby, actively attracting us to their door, Whistler. I don't think they would be so foolish. Blade is not a reckless man. On the contrary, he is very clever. His recent experiences have made him aware that something is amiss. He initially thought that the vampire families, having lost their turf in New York, would fight with the vampires in the surrounding cities for survival territories. Logically, a high possibility. Now, however, this has deviated from such a possibility. Thinking about the content of the Book of Death that he learned from these vampires, It is clear that summoning the blood god is the real truth of the matter. Blade, I feel this is more like a trap. Whistler shakes his head, his expression serious and grave. Such secretive matters should be kept absolutely confidential, yet we can easily learn from these vampires. Don't you find it strange? Even if it's a trap, I can't just ignore it. How could Blade not understand? But this is clearly a blatant scheme. The opponent is openly telling Blade, I'm going to summon the blood god. Come and stop me if you dare. I've definitely set a bunch of traps for you. Will you come? If he doesn't come, the blood god will descend, bringing disaster and calamity to humanity. If he does, Blade knows the chances of his own demise are high. Blade despises vampires. He didn't have a choice in these two options, not even a second of hesitation. You really are like your father, Whistler says helplessly. Blade was his old friend's child, also a vampire hunter, but an accident turned Blade's mother into a vampire, and he later received news of her death. Blade's father, driven mad by revenge for his wife, knew it was a trap but still charged in regardless, with Whistler, as a friend, fighting alongside him, ultimately dying to save Whistler from danger. He then took Blade in and raised him. Blade also knew his own background, and since then, he has hated vampires and embarked on the path of a hunter. But now, such events are happening again. Whistler does not stop him, but noticing Blade's looking over, he immediately raises his shotgun. I was hunting vampires when you were still in your mother's womb, you little brat. I'm a top-tier vampire hunter. The meaning of my life is to die on the path of hunting vampires. If you want to stop me, then prepare for me to kick your ass. Whistler curses and swears. His temperament has always been a gentleman, explosive, which is the character of a top-tier vampire hunter. Even though he is quite old, it remains the same. Then let us boldly embark on the path of death together, Blade says, a corner of his mouth lifting. A resignedly heroic spirit spreads. Maybe we can find another helper, Blade. Whistler suddenly breaks the somber mood, thoughtfully. Are you talking about that guy in New York driving out vampires? Blade raises an eyebrow. Since he has the ability to massacre vampires on a large scale, his capabilities are undoubtedly strong. But doesn't he know about the Book of Death? Whistler is puzzled. Could it be he is waiting for the summoning ritual to succeed? Whistler is shocked by this bold idea. How is that possible? The positions of the two parties are completely different. The other party has no reason to let the blood god descend. Otherwise, the person retaliated against would definitely be the first. Do you have any news of him? He keeps a low profile. My well-informed friends can't find any clues. Maybe he could surprise us. I'm truly surprised. Located about 30 kilometers outside New York in a highly secluded suburb, Baishao stands atop a towering cliff several kilometers away from this area, overlooking what appears to be an uninhabited region below. The surrounding environment here is quite unique. Deep within the dense forest, surrounded by hills, ordinary people would certainly get lost here. However, there are many such places on the outskirts of New York. About 1 kilometer away, there is a road leading to New York. Drivers don't pay much attention to this place. If one truly couldn't resist the urge to explore, it would be a case of using kerosene to put out a fire, a journey with no return. Baishao could distinctly sense that right beneath that area, there were thousands of unique vampire presences, with exceptionally pure bloodlines. A wave of experience points, much to Baijiao's surprise. It can only be said that these vampire families have a commendable heritage. Even in escape, they took many blood slaves and blood bags with them, supplying their own needs for consumption. Master, the leader constructing the summoning ritual, was chosen by the New York Vampire Elders Council, Deacon Frost. He is now the vampire leader and is also in charge of building the summoning altar. Behind him, a vampire elder dressed in a black tailcoat, looking very proper, spoke respectfully, his eyes filled with admiration for Baishao. He is one of the insiders manipulated by Baijiao's psychic powers. He also holds a position in the Vampire Council. Driven by him and another insider elder, the summoning ritual proceeded so smoothly, and they also facilitated the gathering of many vampire families here, waiting for their great master to reap the harvest. Of course, They too were part of the harvest, but they possessed a spirit of sacrifice, believing that risking their own lives was the greatest and most noble act, including other vampires who should also offer their lives to their master. Bai Xiao was very pleased. He decided that after all other vampires and the blood god were dead, he would finally eliminate these two elders. Life and money dedicated to himself, how grand. He was almost moved to shed crocodile tears. But before a tear could fall, he suddenly turned his head, glancing through the dense forest to a highway about 3 kilometers away, where a modified Ford muscle car was speeding along, carrying a distinctly different vampire presence and an old human man. Through the car window, he saw the two individuals' appearances and clothing, especially the black man driving the muscle car, dressed too classically. Bai Xiao recognized him at a glance. Blade. Deacon Frost needs a sacrifice to summon the blood god. The Daywalker's blood is very special, so he decided to make him one of the sacrifices. He set up 5 vampire gathering sites on the periphery to disclose the matter of the blood god, attracting the Daywalker to find this place. The Insider Elder, lacking Bai Xiao's super senses, revealed everything he knew upon mentioning Blade. Bai Xiao immediately clutched his heart, feeling a pang. This Deacon Frost had a way to die, sending so many heads to Blade. Was this all part of his experience? He looked at Blade with a somewhat unusual gaze, wondering whether to give Blade a good beating. Thinking that this guy was only half vampire, half human, hard to define an identity, and all his actions were aimed at exterminating vampires, such a broad-minded person, he decided to let this guy go. So, are those traps prepared underground all for this guy? Yes, great master. Not a bad idea. Bai Xiao was satisfied, with the vampires wanting to smash him and needing his blood to summon the blood god, so he prepared to watch coldly from the sidelines. It wasn't his indifference. Rather, it was essential for the blood god to descend properly. A win-win situation. Go, inform that guy called Deacon that Blade is here. Let your people die less, preferably not at all. They're all mine. Oh, and if that human comes, just lock him up. Yes. The Insider Elder respectfully spoke, then disappeared like a ghost on the spot. It was now afternoon, and perhaps due to the impending descent of the blood god, the weather was overcast with dense clouds. Although it wasn't raining, there was no sun either. That's why the Insider Elder could move about in broad daylight. Watching the black figure quickly dash towards the gathering site, Bai Xiao stood in place, silently waiting. If all went as expected, the evening instance would open today, another wave of experience incoming. He was all too patient to wait. He glanced at the silver cross, sword stuck in the ground in front of him. He cheerfully whistled the beautiful melody of J. Chow's William Castle as he waited. On the highway, the black Ford muscle car sped along, the sky behind filled with rolling, gloomy clouds, creating an especially sinister world. Inside the car, Blade drove while Whistler, the white-haired old man in the passenger seat, was preparing to check the equipment brought along. This weather's really ghastly. Whistler glanced at the sky, full of dark clouds outside the window, and couldn't help but mutter a curse. They had rushed here today, and the sunless weather was certainly not in their favor. He opened a map, looking at the positions marked on it. Next, Blade would act as the main force, and, as usual, he would provide support and assistance from behind Blade. Blade drove with a look of stern determination. After driving for several minutes, he stepped on the brakes, and the car stopped by the roadside, looking out through the side window at the dense forest in the distance. I really love this environment. It reminds me of the time I hunted a vampire elder with your father in the forest. Seeing such a scene, Whistler exclaimed, "Ready to go meet your end, Whistler?" "Of course, just don't die before me, Blade." Whistler pulled out an old-fashioned sniper rifle, his body already laden with equipment. "Then let's go." The car door opened, and Blade and Whistler crossed the barrier, advancing into the depths of the distant forest until the foliage swallowed their figures. Beneath the earth, a colossal primordial space was constructed. Covering tens of thousands of square meters, it reached depths of hundreds of meters. Various stone columns supporting it were engraved with mysterious patterns, forming an intricate network of passages. The few thousand remaining vampires in New York all resided here, along with many imprisoned blood food and special refrigeration rooms for storing blood bags. The vampires, with their astounding heritage, spent a great deal of money and manpower to trade for time efficiency. It was almost as if a miraculous underground cavern was constructed in a short amount of time. The walls of the passages were adorned with oil lamps, their dim yellow light illuminating the dark underground, shedding some brightness on the chilly depths. At the deepest part, there stood a moderately sized altar flanked by 12 circular stone columns, with 12 deep grooves carved on the altar. This place was also known as the Temple of Eternal Night. A group of vampires stood around the constructed passages, looking at the altar where now stood Deacon Frost, a young and handsome vampire in a suit and white shirt, his top button undone to reveal some skin, slightly stylish and unbridled. Deacon Frost, full of vigor, stood on the altar, backed by the elders of the council. He slightly lifted his head, scanning the blood brethren gathered along the wall edges of the passages, and passionately said, "My fellow vampires, we are the noble race. We have a heritage of 10,000 years. We were once glorious, spreading the fame of vampires across the world. But since the rise of humans, we started to hide. Our former prey became the masters of this world. Now, a damned human butcher has forced us to flee our home, trampled our glory, forcing us to hide like rats in the jungle. We must reclaim our past glory, summon the blood god to lead us to brilliance, make the world kneel at our feet, awakening the deepest fears humans once had towards us." His stirring words rang like a bell in the souls of all vampires, awakening their pride and arrogance from within. They're the great vampire race, the immortal species. How can they hide because of humans? They should be the true masters of the world. These vampires opened their mouths, revealing sharp fangs, their faces fierce. They let out a thunderous roar. Roar. The terrifying sound echoed throughout the underground. Deacon Frost slightly tilted his head back, closed his eyes, and spread his arms, enjoying the moment, unknowing that tonight he would become divine. At that moment, a vampire elder approached amid the gaze of the others, and spoke to the impressive-looking Deacon Frost. "Blade has arrived, bringing an old hunter." And this elder was none other than an insider controlled by Bai Shao. Deacon was unaware of this. He slowly opened his eyes, turned his head to look at the elder and the other elders, and sneered. "He has indeed come. The last elect is in place. Catch him alive." The vampire elders nodded and turned to leave. The elders, high in rank, but also possessing the purest vampire bloodlines, were significantly stronger than ordinary vampires. In a flash, deep underground, the vampires quietly awaited the hunter stepping into the trap prepared for him. Deacon had his trusted aides head to another location, where molds were specially constructed to extract fresh blood from the last elect. At the entrance to the underground passage, Blade and Whistler stepped in. The long corridor was empty, the wall lamps on either side automatically lighting up. Blade and Whistler exchanged a glance, stepping down the stairs one by one, advancing along the passage, and when they reached the end, they faced an extremely spacious area. The elders and thousands of vampires had already been waiting there. "Not giving us even a slight chance, huh?" Whistler helplessly said. His and Blade's original plan was for him to find a suitable spot to hide and provide long-range support for Blade. But the plan hadn't even started before they were blocked by a large group of vampires. Click! Blade cocked the tube magazine of his shotgun, loading the ammunition. Whistler placed his sniper rifle on his back, pulling out a shotgun from his lower back. In this densely packed combat, without a doubt, the sniper rifle was less effective, while the shotgun, a godsend for crowd control, was always the divine weapon. The battle was about to begin, but suddenly the insider elder stepped on a raised part of the ground. Blade and Whistler's expressions changed, instantly sensing danger. Both of them swiftly rolled to the sides. Unfortunately, Whistler, being older, was not agile enough, and the floor stone where he had been standing sank, revealing a deep pit. Whistler still fell downward. Below was a long, sloping slide. Whistler slid uncontrollably downwards. Blade dodged the trap, instinctively reaching out to grab Whistler, but it was too late. And he also paid the price for his unnecessary action. Just as the whooshing sound reached his ears, Blade turned his head, barely having time to be angry about Whistler falling into the trap, as several vampire elders had already dashed towards him with ghostly speed. Blade's extensive combat experience came into play instantly. He changed his stance full of vulnerabilities, leaned back, and half laying in midair, he was about to pull the trigger of his shotgun. However, inexplicably, at the moment he was about to fire, his body seemed uncontrollable, and at this critical moment he did not pull the trigger. This instant gave two insider elders the chance to rush forward, one disarming Blade of his shotgun, and the other grabbing Blade's neck, lifting a knee towards his lower back. Crack! A crisp sound echoed. Blade's lower back was severely injured and fractured. His face immediately contorted in pain. He still wanted to counterattack, but the other vampire elders did not give him a chance. They swarmed him, twisting Blade's hands and breaking his leg bones. Blade was captured alive. Blade's eyes behind his sunglasses involuntarily closed. His and Whistler's noble sacrifice at this moment seemed like a joke. Wow, look who it is. The renowned daywalker, Blade, caught in such a sorry state. In the blood-grinding chamber, one of Deacon's minions, a male vampire with golden hair, dramatically gazes at Blade, who is stripped to the waist, revealing his muscular torso. Blade's limbs have been severed, and he is half embedded in the grinding device, his gaze icy and disdainful as he stares at the vampire with contempt and indifference. The sight ignites fury in the male vampire. He reaches out, his sharp nails poised in front of Blade's chest, gently pressing and sliding down, leaving 5 bloody marks on the strong, dark muscles. Blade remains expressionless, quietly watching. This bores the vampire, who loses interest in tormenting him and leaves only with the words, "I look forward to the sight of you dying in agony." After these words, he exits the stone chamber. Blade closes his eyes, knowing all his efforts have been in vain, now uncertain whether the old man Whistler is still alive. Meanwhile, in the underground passages, Bai Shao carries a cross-sword down the stairs into the depths. With the memory of an insider elder, he navigates the labyrinthine corridors as if they were nothing, boldly heading towards the Temple of Eternal Night. On his way, he encounters no vampires. They had all gone to the Temple of Eternal Night for the crucial moment of the Blood God's descent. Upon reaching the Temple of Eternal Night and seeing the dense crowd of vampires, Bai Shao simply walks through them. Without even pushing, his mental power controls the scene, parting the vampires before him, allowing him to stand at the forefront. He casually thrusts his sword into the ground, standing out like a lion among sheep, eagerly watching the main event, or prey, on the altar below. His presence, an anomaly among the keenly blood-scented vampires, would typically be detected immediately. Given his life force and the potent energy within his blood, it's akin to a starved wolf spotting fresh, bleeding meat. However, Bai Zhao's group mental suggestion makes everyone, including Deacon Frost awaiting on the altar, unconsciously treat him as one of their own, ignoring him. This is how he manipulates the nervous system through mental power, forcefully suppressing his own capabilities. This ability, Bai Shao thinks, is too useful not to develop further. The wolf in sheep's clothing almost grabs a stool and some sunflower seeds. From his vantage point, he glances towards the wall behind which, in a specially constructed stone chamber, Blade resides, presumably brooding over his capture. The enemy is still unaware of how easily he was captured. Bai Shao won't tell him that at the moment he met Blade, he had already infused him with a mental suggestion, which should have allowed Blade to remain calm and composed in crisis, delaying the inevitable. But ultimately, under Bai Zhao's influence, Blade becomes a mere jest. He won't apologize. After all, as long as he keeps silent, no one will know. As night falls and the commotion subsides, The grinding device finally covers the last half of Blade's body. Only his hands are visible as the device's spikes penetrate his body, and with a dull thud, blood flows from his wounds to the ground. Daywalker's special blood contains tremendous power, something other vampires do not possess. Because he has qualities only the ancestral vampires possess, he is unafraid of sunlight. Alone on the altar, Deacon stands as the sealing patterns gather Blade's blood, compressing it into a drop of purest essence. Suddenly, terrifying thunder and lightning strike. Above ground, under a shrouded night sky, ominous clouds swirl and lightning explodes, signaling impending disaster. Inside the Temple of Eternal Night, the drop of blood slowly falls as Deacon tilts his head back and opens his mouth. The moment the blood hits his palate, the mysterious patterns on the altar floor emit a fierce glow. The patterns on the 12 stone pillars around the walls do the same. Lightning strikes from the sky, penetrating the earth and striking the 12 pure-blood vampires standing at the pillars. Their bodies explode under the lightning, their blood transforming into bats that flutter excitedly into Deacon's body. Boom! Under Bai Zhao's increasingly excited gaze, he feels the terrifying energy erupting from Deacon's body, sweeping through the Temple of Eternal Night like a storm. The overwhelming presence, like the rebirth of an ancient vampire ancestor, compels all vampires to kneel submissively, their faces filled with reverence. Bai Zhao's eyes brighten, his joy increasing. Meanwhile, in the stone chamber, the terrible storm also reaches Blade, filling his eyes with bitterness. He feels powerless, hating his own weakness. Now trapped and losing much blood, his life is slowly ebbing away. Is this where his fate ends? No. Outside the chamber, Blade suddenly hears clear footsteps. Although slow, they approach the chamber. After so many years together, though invisible, Blade immediately recognizes the footsteps as belonging to Whistler. As the sounds grow louder with a dull thud, the grinding device opens automatically. Blade is still embedded in the other half of the device, but Whistler's figure also appears in front of him. Looking somewhat disheveled and dirty, Whistler limps on an injured right leg, but he holds 2 blood bags in his hand. Happy to see me, you little brat? Every critical moment, you always need me. Well said, old man. I've always needed you. For the first time in his life, Blade reveals a bright smile. Whistler rolls his eyes, unfazed by the terrifying pressure of the storm, and struggles forward. Following Blade's indication, he finds a mechanism to release Blade from the grinding device. As soon as he is freed, Blade collapses to the ground, weakened from the loss of much blood. Whistler quickly stuffs the blood bags into Blade's mouth. We haven't completely failed yet, Blade. Blade frantically absorbed the blood from 2 bags of frozen donated blood to compensate for the blood he had lost. Soon, revitalized by the fresh blood, Blade's punctured wounds healed themselves. Blade stood up. Whistler handed him the katana that belonged to Blade, which he found behind him. Kid, it's not a good habit to scatter your belongings. Besides the katana, there are also 2 guns and several vials of serum specially made for vampires. However, without any clothes, Blade had to fight in his skin, but Whistler didn't care about that. This old man, having sought out Blade amidst an aura of blood-fueled vigor despite his injuries, had exhausted all his strength. He leaned against a grinding tool, breathing heavily. Pain was etched across his aged face. Do what you must, Blade. This is all I can do. Blade nodded, wrapping the serum vials around his waist, holding the katana in one hand and a shotgun in the other. He turned his neck, feeling a surge of vitality within him. And then, with a look that Whistler thought was insane, he accelerated madly. Like a tank, he smashed through the thick stone wall with his shoulder, and with a loud crash, his robust figure, along with a cloud of debris and dust, plummeted heroically towards the altar below. Is jumping really supposed to be this brutal? Damn it, Whistler muttered under his breath, far from envious of Blade's superhuman body. There, Blade roared Deacon Frost. With the shotgun in his left hand, he aimed at Deacon below and pulled the trigger. Bang! A burst of sparks erupted from the shotgun, and a dense spray of specially made silver pellets scattered like petals. However, to Blade's astonishment, Deacon, looking up with blood-red eyes, disdainfully watched, unmoving. A blood-red barrier enveloped Deacon's body. The silver pellets struck this barrier, creating ripples before being dissolved by the surging blood energy into molten droplets. Blade landed on the altar, staring at Deacon, who looked at him as if he were a clown, gripping his katana tightly. The overwhelming presence, the pure, terrifying pressure, triggered the vampiric fear inherent in Blade's blood, a traditional vampiric lineage suppression, the unconditional dominance of the higher over the lower. At that moment, Deacon, having become the progenitor blood god through the ritual, represented the origin of all vampires. Blade, being half human, half vampire, was naturally suppressed. While not as completely dispirited as other vampires, both his fighting capability and strength were greatly diminished. Yet Blade, fearless, stared at Deacon, his eyes revealing a chilling, murderous intent. He was the bravest warrior, the Blade Warrior. Deacon, faced with Blade's fierce momentum, did not immediately respond. Instead, he slightly tilted his head towards another direction, towards the only person in the hall who had not knelt, a stranger. From the beginning, you were there, waiting for my arrival. Should I call you foolish or clever? I can offer you a chance, human. Kneel before me, and I can grant you eternal life. Deacon, or rather the blood god, had taken over this body, inheriting Deacon's memories and the formidable power and will of the blood god, shattering the latent mental power of a human who had quietly infiltrated the temple of eternal night. And he had been watching all along as the blood god descended. The unusual aura from the humans signaled danger, yet the blood god was supremely confident in his power, believing no mere human could be a threat. Thus, he maintained the blood god's pride. Blade heard all of Deacon's words and realized that Deacon had been possessed by the blood god. He turned following the blood god's gaze, only to see all the vampires on the upper passageway shivering and prostrating, while he, dressed in a black coat and hat, a sharp silver cross, sword planted in the ground, his dark eyes quietly overseeing the scene below, locked eyes with the blood god. A very young Asian man, extremely handsome even from his perspective. Facing the powerful aura of the blood god, he showed not a trace of fear, but a unique confidence. The look in his eyes conveyed a message that Blade recognized, reminiscent of his own when he hunted vampires. The look of a hunter eyeing his prey. A thought involuntarily crossed Blade's mind, shocking him as he looked at the Asian man, stirring a tumult of emotions within him. He was the one who had suddenly appeared in New York, relentlessly hunting vampires, forcing all vampires living there to flee. Blade and Whistler had speculated that Deacon and the other vampires were planning to summon the blood god, and this man would surely be watching. They guessed he would intervene at the critical moment. Their guess was correct, but the process and outcome were wrong. He had infiltrated the temple of eternal night early on, simply watching the blood god's descent. Was the one he intended to hunt from the start the blood god himself? Damn it, the kid has such confidence. Blade cursed inwardly, knowing his own nature would never allow such risky actions. But now the blood god had descended, and nothing could change that. He just hoped the boy was not a mere arrogant fool with power. The boy, of course, was Bai Xiao. He looked down at the blood god, who spoke as if bestowing a favor, a smile curving his lips. Eternal life? What does a praise say about eternal life? As his words fell, he extended his hand, a dazzling golden light blossoming in his palm, then forcefully slammed it towards the ground. Boom! A torrent of golden energy instantly swept through the entire temple of eternal night, engulfing the 3 circular passageways and all the vampires cowering there, instantly turning them to ash. The temple of eternal night shook violently, with ceiling and wall debris continuously falling amidst clouds of dust. The candlelight was blown swiftly by the fierce wind, as majestic golden spirals raced through the 3 ring-shaped passages on the walls of the temple of eternal night, blooming like golden whirlpools. At the altar, the blood god, Deacon, and Blade, even without direct contact with the majestic golden energy, were essentially at the center of the golden vortex, burning their skin and blood like the sun. Both possessed traits that made them fearless of solar energy radiation. However, that was merely the solar radiation from a sun, which is about 149.5 million kilometers away. The golden magic unleashed by Xiao and their proximity was less than 50 meters. It wasn't enough to cause injuries, but the surface of their skin was already scorched with burn marks. Blade couldn't help but raise his hand in front of his eyes to shield against the blinding light, while blood god Deacon's body was covered with a thin film of blood, protecting himself. The disdain and arrogance that had been on his face were gone. He surveyed the disappearing figures in the swirling golden energy, his expression turning ugly. Although he didn't care about the weak vampires, after all, he had come to the human world and needed manpower. Transforming a vampire took time, especially a pureblood. Moreover, he had just told his opponent to kneel before him, promising them eternal life, but then with a powerful move, he annihilated thousands of the vampire. This was no ordinary humiliation. The golden energy vortex did not last long and gradually settled down. The candle flames racing on the lamps by the walls calmed, and faint golden stars could be seen floating in the air, a beautiful sight. Xiao stood up, adopting Deacon's previous posture, arms spread wide and head tilted slightly upwards, as if embracing the world. Most here were pure-blood vampires, whose level of life was much higher than that of mixed-blood vampires, including many elders. From his perspective, he could see the large and small blood essence orbs gathering, forming a blood river that surged into his body. In just a few seconds, his level of life leaped once again. Blood surged, and the raging magic surged like a tide, revitalizing his body with new vitality. Muscles, bones, organs, cells, brain nerves, all were significantly enhanced. Xiao was exhilarated, but blood god Deacon was utterly confused. Bai Zhao's comprehensive leap in life level resulted in a remarkably rapid increase in his already formidable aura. He didn't understand the cause and effect involved. He wasn't aware that Bai Zhao could grow stronger by killing. He thought he had instantly killed thousands of vampires, triggering an excited state, causing his aura to uncontrollably surge. Was this person a berserker, madman? Whether in battle or killing, both could excite him. Blood God was genuinely worried now. Bai Zhao had initially kept a low profile, suddenly displaying power to kill thousands of vampires, and he had managed to maintain his composure, since aura and physical strength are more closely related. He estimated that he had the upper hand. As an ancestral blood god who had seen many ancient gods, Bai Zhao seemed trivial. But then, the aura surged irrationally, possibly reversing the situation. In battle, differences in strength can be managed, unless too vast, through tactics and combat intelligence. But the real fear is facing an opponent with berserker, madman, traits. It was perfect to press the attack, but fearsome if the opponent became frantic from the pounding, their power irrationally surging, or if hitting a specific spot triggered a drastic power increase. Such irrationality is unbearable. On blood god Deacon's side, things were unreasonable before the fight even started, so why bother continuing? Blood god wanted to flee. Bai Zhao was not willing. Those thousands of vampires were just a dessert. Blood god was the main course. Bai Zhao reached for the adamantine cross, sword planted in the ground, his explosive force cracking the ground and tearing through the air, causing blood god and Blade's pupils to shrink. Bai Zhao had already appeared before them, just a meter above blood god, raising the cross sword, its blades swirling with golden light, transforming into a magnificent golden long sword. Damn! Blood god tilted his head back, his blood-colored pupils reflecting the opponent's indifferent face and the raised cross sword, his hands spreading instantly. The blood magic unique to the ancestral blood god reappeared in the human world. Boom! On the altar floor, a giant circular pattern drawn with flowing blood appeared, cold, mysterious, and eerie, seemingly capable of draining a person's blood with a glance. Immediately, a torrential surge of blood erupted like a fountain from the magic circle. Blade felt the terrifying threat. The moment the magic circle lit up, he immediately tried to flee the altar, but it was too late. The surging blood, as if from the deepest hell, filled with filth, terror, and darkness, continuously washed over his body. His katana and shotgun corroded in the blood wash. His skin felt as if it had been slashed by thousands of knives, covered with countless wounds, blood flowing, which was then drawn and transformed by the magic circle, relentlessly attacking Blade. Roar. The skin, muscles, bones, organs, and the torment of being washed with filthy blood, the extreme pain made this tough man unbearable, causing him to roar, his eyes bloodshot. Blade was merely affected by the overflow, while Bai Xiao, the target of the blood magic, faced the emerging blood tide without hesitation, channeling magic into the adamantine cross sword, its blade fully turning golden. The splendid golden light illuminated the temple of eternal night. He hovered in midair, raising the golden divine sword like a god-slaying figure, while below, Blood God looked up angrily at the partially visible figure enveloped by the blood tide, and Blade, in agony in the blood wash, appeared almost frozen in that moment. Boom! The sky was filled with rolling thunder and endless lightning, covering the vast expanse of dark clouds with a sea of thunder. The endless flashes of lightning exploded wildly, causing the space between heaven and earth to cycle between darkness and light. On the ground, the hills suddenly shook with a loud roar, as if a major earthquake had struck. The mountains and the ground split open, and countless cracks spread wildly like a giant spiderweb. Animals and birds from within these cracks screamed in terror and fled in panic. Instinct drove them to escape the dreadful Forbidden Zone. At the source of all this, within the Temple of Eternal Night beneath the surface, Blade seemed like a cannonball smashing upward, hitting the wall of the second-floor stone cavern corridor, creating a huge dent. His entire body was embedded in the wall, soaked in filthy blood, with his face, chest, and all exposed skin horribly mangled. It was as if he had been scorched by flames, ghastly and terrifying. Especially his face, which was no longer recognizable as Blade's, resembling a dreadful demon instead. Blade, embedded in the wall, vomited blood profusely. The blood flowed down his body and the wall, forming a pool on the ground. The severe impact and turmoil had severely damaged his body, especially with a massive loss of blood. It was a testament to his willpower and strength that he was still conscious. Even so, Blade now realized that he had lost his ability to fight. Any movement caused intense pain in all the burnt and bloodied parts of his body, continuously stimulating his brain nerves. Blade finally realized what kind of monster those two were. He also understood why the Book of Death recorded the descent of the Blood God as a great disaster for humanity, with blood drowning the world. An ancestral blood god was simply beyond his ability to contend with. He had confidently thought that although the blood god was powerful, he could still fight it, even at the cost of his own life, to inflict heavy damage on the enemy. But now, he realized how wrong his assessment had been. He wasn't even close to being a match. Firstly, there was too great a gap in their underlying strength. Blade was still using weapons like samurai swords, silver bullets, and garlic, which were supposed to be effective against vampires. His combat style was close-range fighting, but what about the blood god? A single spell of blood magic could annihilate Blade in an instant, with the disparity in strength vast as a chasm. However, Blade was not disheartened because he saw in the blood-enshrouded temple of eternal night a dazzling golden radiance like a blazing sun, burning away all filth and darkness. The gushing blood evaporated. Bai Xiao held a cross-shaped longsword, standing resolutely on the altar, facing a grim and uncertain blood god. The altar under his feet was cracked from a violent collision, with intricate patterns, and the 12 surrounding stone columns broke and fell chaotically. The intense vibrations caused the ceiling and surrounding walls to continuously shed dust and debris. You are very special, one of the most special humans I have ever seen. How did you obtain this power? Was it bestowed, borrowed, or contract? The blood god asked, his bloody pupils reflecting the image of the human boy opposite him, dressed in a black coat and shirt and wearing a round hat like a noble prince. As an ancestral blood god with a long life tracing back to Earth's ancient times, he was a true old monster, having witnessed the splendor and twilight of the gods. Of course, he was just a minor figure in the ancient times, nothing compared to the mighty ancient underworld gods, but surviving until now meant his experience was unmatched by ordinary people. Originally summoned by his descendants, the blood god arrived on Earth with enthusiasm, not to rule, but to stir things up. But right away, he encountered a monster he had never seen before. Outwardly just a human, the blood god could tell that Bai Xiao was a pure human, but far too powerful, especially with the golden energy that countered his own. He had never seen such power among the gods. He did not sense any lineage, soul, or divinity associated with those gods in Bai Xiao. This meant that this person had no connection with the gods he knew. But what did it matter if he had no powerful backers? Compared to the gods of ancient times, Bai Xiao was clearly weaker, but he was very young, and that was his advantage. The blood god also doubted whether he could kill this young monster unless he could cross dimensions and descend to Earth in his true form, which was utterly unrealistic. He could not violate the ancient gods' pact made on Earth. Even if he did, he probably wouldn't have encountered this human boy. Then he would have been killed by other ancient gods crossing dimensions. Now, he was just a wisp of consciousness occupying this body, similar to how demons and angels possess the bodies of believers to descend to Earth. His true strength was severely suppressed. With this level of power, he had to consider not just whether he could kill his opponent, but how he might escape from him. As for the blood god's doubts, Bai Xiao completely ignored them. He leaned forward, his feet staggered slightly as he squatted, his gaze intently fixed on the blood god. He had only one thought: to kill the blood god. It's really absurd. Who created this monster? The blood god muttered to himself, his headache intensifying. He was certain this human boy wasn't a natural occurrence. Humans couldn't naturally possess such power. Their lineage was too weak, the weakest among all civilizations. It couldn't have been a natural birth. It had to be some god he had never seen or beyond his imagination, who had handcrafted this spokesperson. So the blood god balked. He really didn't want to continue the fight. The cost and benefit were entirely disproportionate. He wasn't senseless. A fight with no benefits was a losing battle. If he lost, he would lose the body he had taken over. And if he won, if he accidentally killed this human child, there might be a god standing behind this boy who could cross time and dimensions to kill him. Killing a spokesperson would be like slapping the face of their master. Not going mad would be strange. He couldn't afford it, so he chose to avoid it. With a snort, the blood god prepared to cast blood magic to make a quick escape. But just then, a radiant burst of brilliance flashed in Bai Xiao's eyes, and a tempest of psychic power swept through like a storm, unabashedly assaulting the blood god's mind and will. The ancestral blood god, strong in mind and will, or not? Certainly strong, as he is a being capable of traversing dimensions. He is one of the primordial vampires, embodying the very concept of vampirism, manifesting merely as a strand of consciousness. Yet, it is just a mere strand of consciousness. This strand of consciousness does not bring a strong defense of mind and will, especially under the overwhelming assault of Bai Xiao's tumultuous psychic storm, where the complete mental barriers built by the blood god himself are breached. Bai Xiao cannot control or access the memories of the other, nor does he dare to take risks, for at this level of existence, who knows how much complexity one might add to his own mental world. What Bai Xiao seeks is to control the situation. A terrifying psychic storm, mental bombs mercilessly bombard the blood god's mental realm, rendering him unable to escape using his blood magic abilities. Taking this opportunity, Bai Xiao suddenly charges towards the blood god. The surging magic infuses a cruciform sword, its blade coated with golden magic. Beneath the brilliant gold lies the energy potent enough to grievously injure or even kill the blood god. Sensing danger, the blood god simultaneously calms the raging storm in his mental realm with his consciousness and power while controlling Deacon's body to fight Bai Shao. Before Bai Shao arrives, the blood god extends his right hand, blood spreading from his skin to form a long sword, which he thrusts forward just in time to protect himself. Boom! A sound like metal striking explodes, golden and blood-red clashing to produce spectacular sparks. A thunderous noise reverberates throughout the Temple of Eternal Night as terrifying power bursts from the golden crucifix sword, assaulting the blood god's body, causing it to tremble violently as the force spreads outward. A domineering power impacts the ground, shaking the entire altar and the Temple of Eternal Night, and even the ground beneath. Walls crack and collapse, terrifying cracks appear on the ground. Large chunks of stone fall from the ceiling, and the ground finally gives way. Through the collapsed surface, the churning dark clouds above unleash continuous thunderbolts, bombarding the Temple of Eternal Night, as if intending to destroy everything within the temple. Except for Bai Shao on the altar, the blood god disregards the thunderbolts striking around him and the falling boulders as the two grapple with each other. But when gods clash, mortals suffer. Blade, sensing the vibrations in the walls and the Temple of Eternal Night, feels a terrifying danger and knows he cannot stay any longer, or he might die from the repercussions. He then remembers Whistler in the stone chamber, his will as strong as steel, ignoring the pain his body endures. Thankfully, his physique far surpasses that of ordinary humans, and his strong regenerative abilities allow him to recover considerably. At least his previously grotesque face is mostly healed. He forcefully extricates himself from the wall, stumbles, and nearly kneels on the ground. Stabilizing himself, he slowly makes his way along the corridor towards the stone chamber. Just as he exits the corridor, another terrifying explosion resounds within the Temple of Eternal Night, signaling the intense battle between the human boy and the blood god has begun. Blade, anxious, feels the massive waves of impact and pressure urging him to hurry, quickening his pace towards the stone chamber. As expected, Whistler has fainted in front of the chamber, his forehead stained with blood, a stone pressing down on him. Clearly sensing the danger, Whistler had tried to leave the stone chamber with his aged body, yet he was still affected. Blade strains to move the stone, hearing Whistler's heartbeat and breathing sounds, not as vigorous as a healthy person, but at least not close to death. Expressionless, Blade lifts Whistler onto his back, enduring the burning pain on his back skin, and hastens along the corridor towards the surface. They must leave quickly. Boom, boom, boom. The explosions grow louder and the vibrations stronger as the vampire-built underworld gradually begins to collapse, stone pillars, walls, and corridors densely cracking, with large stones occasionally falling from above. Blade, relying on his superior physical condition and danger perception, dodges the falling stones. After passing through several corridors, Blade finally sees the only exit, stepping onto the teetering steps, carrying Whistler, the thunder growing louder around them just as the surface world's vibrations reach a peak. Blade escapes to the surface with Whistler. He turns back to see a large depression formed in the surface, especially at the center where a 1,000-meter-deep hole is visible, with thunderbolts falling like heavy rain, a sight terrifying to behold. Blade takes a deep breath, his strength nearly depleted due to significant blood loss. Yet he clenches his teeth, carrying Whistler and trying to run further away. Before running 1,000 meters, a earth-shaking roar and the sound of metal clashing follow, accompanied by a surge of overwhelming air waves that lift Blade and the carried Whistler into the air. Blade and Whistler were hurled tens of meters away, with Blade's back even slamming into a tree, snapped by the blast wave. Most unfortunate of all, his body was impaled by a broken tree branch, and the already scant amount of blood flowed from the wound. As a tough guy, Blade remained expressionless. However, the twitching at the corner of his eye indicated a torrent of American profanity was ready to burst forth from within him. Whistler was somewhat luckier, landing on the nearby ground, which was somewhat loose and cushioned with weeds, so he received minimal damage. The severe jolt brought him back to consciousness. After a pained groan, he held his forehead, with the sounds of thunder, metal clashing, and roaring voices mixing into a cacophonous symphony in his ears, nearly shattering his eardrums. Whistler shook his dazed head, lay prone on the ground against the fierce wind, and looked in the direction of the source of the noise with one hand shielding his front. He faced the direction of the vampire underworld. The evening was pitch dark, but fortunately, the constant lightning brightened the area considerably. He saw two figures colliding at a speed incomprehensible to ordinary humans in the distance. Each clash produced a burst of metal sounds and brilliant sparks. Each impact cracked the ground, shook the earth, and stirred up surging airwaves. A groggy Whistler finally came to his senses in the basement. His last memory was of seeing a brilliant golden vortex engulfing thousands of vampires through the wall shattered by Blade, and then the blood god unleashed a torrent of blood magic, flinging Whistler away. He almost didn't make it. Realizing the danger, Whistler supported his injured body and struggled to escape. Just as he reached the doorway of the stone chamber, he was knocked unconscious by falling rocks due to the intense vibrations. What a crazy world! Whistler exclaimed weakly, then turned his head as if he felt someone watching him, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Good Lord, Blade! Are you all right?" Seeing Blade's miserable condition, Whistler was concerned. Blade's face was expressionless, and the fierce wind mercilessly battered his body, making it impossible for him to extricate himself from the tree branch. Fortunately, his vitality was robust, and he was not going to die anytime soon, just terribly injured. Severe burns, organ and muscle tissue necrosis, and extensive blood loss were merely minor fatal injuries to him. Once the turmoil subsided, he could simply grab a couple of blood bags to drink, and he would still be the vigorous, notorious Daywalker Blade. Seeing that Blade was miserable but not dead, Whistler was somewhat relieved. They looked forward together, their hearts a bit bitter, hoping that the human boy would quickly eliminate the detestable blood god. Otherwise, they both might end up buried here. In front, Bai Xiao and the blood god fought fiercely and freely. Bai Xiao was in a profoundly contradictory state, both rational and excited. Rational because he naturally possessed this rational thinking, handling any crisis with clear thoughts. Excited because the blood god offered him an equal fight. Indeed, an equal fight, since his traversal and stepping onto the path of killing to grow stronger. Bai Xiao's combat abilities had increased terrifyingly fast. For this reason, he quickly shifted from hunting humans to vampires. Bai Xiao had always had an imprecise sense of his own strength, measuring it only from some estimated data. Especially after developing psychic and magical powers, his strength could no longer be measured by basic physical data alone. He was like a clone Tyrannosaurus Rex placed in a primordial jungle, a top predator, unaware of his exact place in the food chain, only knowing he was strong enough, but unclear just how strong. He had never encountered an equal opponent. To stay under the radar, he had never fully exerted his strength. This had been accumulating a destructive urge deep within him. Like a gun enthusiast who constantly buys guns and loves shooting, but has often been unable to fire for various reasons, there's an impulse inside that wants to grab a gun, pull that damn trigger, hear the delightful sound of gunfire, see the flames burst from the muzzle, and see bullets penetrate any material, especially flesh. Bai Xiao was somewhat like this, so the appearance of the blood god not only served to enhance him with life essence, but also provided him an outlet for release. From being an ordinary person capable of destroying cities but never venting out, a dissatisfaction naturally grew, and if not rational enough, it could even distort his psyche. He needed to release the power he had acquired. He wanted to gauge what he could truly achieve. So his excitement grew increasingly intense. The blood god was not beyond his expectations. As the progenitor of vampires, even if just a strand of consciousness descended to occupy the body of Deacon, he still possessed a combat strength equal to Bai Zhao's. Immense power, speed, and the unique blood magic of the vampire race, coupled with his proficiency in close combat. Even initially, despite being at a disadvantage, Bai Zhao was not overwhelmed. Relying on faster thinking, reflexes, speed, and explosive power, he managed not to be suppressed. He voraciously absorbed experience and honed his skills amidst the fight. He was exhilarated by his own growth. The heavens roared with thunderous explosions that masked the terrifying scene unfolding below. A fearsome and thick bolt of lightning struck the altar of the Temple of Eternal Night, reducing the already damaged temple to complete ruins. In a flash of light, in the distance, Bai Zhao wielded a cross-shaped sword tinted with gold as it swept through his enemies. Boom! Sparks flew as the approaching blood god, intent on attacking, was flung away by a tremendous force. The blood god tumbled awkwardly through the air, hurtling back hundreds of meters before he could stabilize. Seeing the blood-soaked sword in his hand damaged by that detestable energy, the blood god once again activated his blood magic to repair the blade. It was infuriating. The physical frame and internal organs of the blood god, Deacon, were shattered by repeated collisions of force. He had no choice but to repeatedly repair himself with blood magic. This was trivial compared to his most troubling issue: the growth in the enemy's strength during the battle, transitioning from being overpowered to being the oppressor. Moreover, his mental realm was ravaged by the enemy's psychic storms and bombs, disrupting his thoughts and spirit, preventing him from using any blood magic or abilities beyond the most basic. He wanted to flee, using blood magic. As a member of the vampire race, he could transform into a bat and escape by flying. However, his opponent was constantly vigilant against this tactic. Any hint of escape, and the opponent would aggressively suppress him like a madman, engaging in intense close combat. He had no choice but to retaliate. Any opening would lead to his decapitation. The blood god knew how the opponent's energy could counteract vampires, and being beheaded was akin to death for him. Escape was not an option. It was frustrating. Who was the wretched creator of such a flawlessly formidable monster? Cursing under his breath, the blood god swore never to return to Earth. The stakes were too high here, with ancient gods from various realms all eyeing this tiny world beyond his control. As he pondered, Bai Zhao charged at him once more. Boom! The ground split open. Below was the surface world, causing the surrounding area to completely collapse. Bai Zhao burst forth with terrifying speed and even more formidable momentum than before. His speed was unexpectedly faster. Caught off guard, the blood god changed his expression, wanting to counterattack, but his opponent was already upon him. With a body twist and a forceful swing, the gold-tinted blade sliced through the air, tracing a beautiful arc. Golden traces streaked through the sky, aiming directly at the head of the blood god, Deacon. The blood god reluctantly raised his blood-drenched sword in defense. Boom! To his astonishment, the blood sword, supposedly harder than any metal, shattered instantly upon impact. The heated, coagulated blood turned into a skyful of crimson fragments as the blade relentlessly swept through the blood god's head. His head, now severed, tumbled through the air. The cleanly cut neck was smooth as it rotated mid-air. Bai Zhao did not pause. His golden sword fluttered up and down, slashing the head into pieces within a second. The scene was horrific. Despite the head being destroyed, the headless corpse still managed to retaliate, stabbing the broken blood sword towards Bai Zhao's neck. Bai Zhao grabbed the attacker by the chest and pushed down forcefully. Boom! The headless body was crushed by overwhelming energy, heavily slamming into the ground. The earth within 100 meters caved in, but Bai Zhao, overpowering the chest of the still resistant headless corpse, let a glint of golden light flash from his eyes. His left hand, infused with immense magic, exerted force again. With a loud boom, the surface collapsed, and he, along with the headless body, plunged toward the Earth's core amid collapsing debris and dust. As he descended with the headless body, Terrifying golden magic erupted like a fountain. A pillar of golden light shot from the depths of the earth through the clouds, piercing the sky, surrounded by a whirlwind of clouds and thunder. The entire scene appeared miraculous, stunning the onlookers, Blade and Whistler, their eyes wide in shock. He is the Son of God. I have witnessed a miracle descend. Whistler, a traditional Westerner from an older generation with some devotion to God, was greatly influenced by God in the Western world. He wasn't the most devout follower, but having witnessed this unbelievable spectacle, he could only associate it with the Son of God. For only the Son of God could possess such power, capable of rivaling, even defeating, an evil progenitor like the Blood God. Moreover, the surge of golden magic felt warm, as if healing his severely damaged body. Whistler wasn't sure if it was just an illusion, but he didn't care, his expression filled with excitement. Blade, on the other hand, hadn't thought so much about it. He only felt unbearable discomfort, extremely so. The pillar of golden energy, merely 1,000 meters away, made the sparse blood in his body feel as though it was burning. He knew that if he were a pure-blooded vampire, the effect would be no different from direct exposure to the sun. Both scenarios would lead to his utter annihilation. "What a crazy world," Blade murmured, his face illuminated by the golden light. Despite his agony, he managed a smile, akin to a believer about to ascend to heaven and become an angel. The radiant golden pillar of light, adorned with entwined thunder and lightning, gradually dimmed and dissipated. Darkness reclaimed the heavens and the earth. Apart from the rolling thunder above, all returned calm. The wild wind ceased. Whistler struggled to his feet, supporting himself on one heavy, staggering foot as he moved toward Blade, who lay nearly flayed of flesh, a pitiful sight that filled Whistler with compassion. Though not his own son, Whistler had raised him from childhood and came to love him dearly as his own. Seeing Blade in such a weakened, miserable state, how could he not feel heartache? Yet Whistler was always known for his fiery temper and soft heart, resembling a blade in sharpness, but tofu in tenderness. He drew a sharp dagger from his leg strap, forcefully cutting the branch that pinned Blade. While speaking, "I've forgotten when was the last time you boasted about your prowess, Blade. Still thinking of putting me out of a job. Look at you now. This is hardly the figure you boasted about. Now I, an old man, still need to do this for you. I certainly don't want to hear that you've died after I retire. Don't expect me to erect a tombstone for you. Huh, I never thought I'd be involved in battles of this magnitude. Look at that place. They could probably kill me with just a fingertip." Despite his weakness, Blade still defended himself. He never considered it boasting. He truly believed he was the greatest vampire hunter in the world. And he still is. As for that Asian boy, he should not be considered human. He is a monster, cloaked in human skin. "We all owe that boy, Blade," said Whistler as he sawed off the branch. Blade, with the broken branch still embedded in his body, slowly stood upright. "I'm more concerned about whether he killed that blood god. He's already dead." As soon as Blade's words fell, another unfamiliar voice reached them, making both tense up involuntarily and turn around, only to see the Asian boy standing hundreds of meters away. Holding a crucifix sword, dressed in an unscathed black coat and pants as if they were brand new, he walked towards them calmly. Bai Zhao's steps were light, a smile curling on his lips, his formidable aura still lingering. Whether it was an illusion or not, Blade and Whistler felt that the boy's presence was even more terrifying than before. Approaching from hundreds of meters away, without any aggressive moves, yet they felt an immense pressure as if carrying a mountain on their backs. Their faces grew solemn. Whistler stepped forward to shield Blade, addressing the approaching Bai Zhao with a grave tone. "Blade is not like the vampires you've encountered. His heart is filled with goodness. He eradicates those vampire scum for humanity. He is not your target, sir." At that moment, Whistler subdued his fiery temper, using a tone filled with sincerity and humility, even pleadingly. He feared that the formidable boy, the Son of God, the new hunting target, had set his sights on Blade, and he did not wish for such an event to occur. Bai Zhao, unhesitant, continued walking towards the old man and Blade. The old man clenched his teeth, gripping the dagger tightly, his hand turning pale from the force. Blade gently pushed the old man aside and stood in front, still with a stoic face looking at Bai Xiao, his expression calm, as if accepting death, perhaps believing it was his destiny. Whistler's heart trembled, his eyes firm. Bai Xiao reached Blade, standing merely a meter away, tilted his head to look at Blade, then at the old man behind him, and suddenly laughed. An interesting pair. I envy your bond. This unexpected turn left Blade and the old man somewhat surprised. Was this boy actually amiable? This contrasted sharply with their previous impressions and his ferocious battle with the blood god. Now, Bai Xiao seemed like a cheerful young man. Scared you, didn't I? Bai Xiao laughed heartily with a touch of mischief. Seeing the boy's demeanor, Whistler finally relaxed and quietly criticized the boy's joke. That's not funny at all. Because of that joke, this old man nearly had a heart attack, sir, Whistler said, stressing the word sir with clear displeasure, implying that the boy was just a troublesome brat. Bai Xiao seemed unconcerned, glancing at Whistler, who was limping and bleeding from his forehead. I think you wouldn't last long in a hospital looking like that. So to make up for my joke, Bai Xiao extended his left hand towards Whistler, and before their astonished eyes, a gentle, even warm, golden beam of energy entered Whistler's chest. Whistler, still confused, suddenly felt a warm sensation spreading through his body. He could distinctly feel his broken bones knitting together, the gash on his forehead and various wounds, old and new, beginning to heal under the mysterious force's influence. It's truly unbelievable. In just 2 seconds, Whistler, who was extremely frail and covered in scars, healed completely. He felt as if his aged body had regained the vigor of his youth. He couldn't believe it as he stretched out his hands and moved his body, feeling the energy he had missed from the past return. This thrilled Whistler immensely. Thank you, sir. You have saved the remainder of my life. I think I might be able to postpone my retirement. Whistler solemnly expressed his gratitude to Bai Xiao. After the growth of Blade, he mostly spent his time forging weapons and repairing gear, a task he did not enjoy as much as he missed the days of chasing vampires with weapons in hand. He did not die on the hunting path, but was defeated by time, which did not allow him to remain a hunter. Now, Bai Xiao had given him a new lease on life. Bai Xiao accepted the old man's gratitude. He had merely acted spontaneously, and the magic he used had replenished even before the old man finished his words of thanks, rejuvenating the old hunter who had spent his life hunting vampires. Bai Xiao greatly admired such a person who had devoted his entire life to fighting supernatural beings deserved his help. As for another, seeing the look from the other party, Bai Xiao shook his head as if helplessly, but in fact he spoke with schadenfreude. If you want to end up like that guy called the Blood God, I wouldn't mind trying. Thinking of the golden column that had just soared into the sky and the probably obliterated blood god, Blade decisively shook his head and said coldly, "This is my badge, and time will remember it." "If you're happy, that's good," was all Bai Xiao could say, given that the other had stolen his experience wave. He knew Blade couldn't die, given his special physique, or else Deacon wouldn't have considered him the best candidate for the blood god's arrival. To some extent, Blade was not a pure vampire, but he still surpassed most pure-blooded vampires, even the so-called vampire elders. These fatal wounds would heal after sleep. Okay, that's done here. See you next time, by the way. As Bai Xiao prepared to leave, he seemed to remember something and pulled out a newly bought phone to throw to Blade. "This has my number. If a monster the previous guy's level appears, remember to contact me. To kill these things, you need the best expert." After saying this, he waved his hand and left stylishly. Blade looked at the phone and then at the boy's retreating figure, snorting coldly. "I'm the expert." His tone was somewhat defensive. The old man wouldn't give Blade any face, especially since his fondness for the boy was at its peak. He believed the boy was the great son of God, sent by God to save the earth. Without saying a word, the old man looked at Blade with a contemptuous gaze, which ignited Blade's temper. Blade snorted again and also left, calling the old man a stinky old man. Whistler laughed heartily, knowing that Blade, the stinky brat, was frustrated. He enjoyed seeing Blade's distressed expression. For Whistler, this trip was not just about the elimination of all the vampire families in New York, or even the greatest crisis, the Blood God. He and Blade had survived, and he had regained the vigor of his youth. Thrilled, Whistler followed behind Blade, contemplating celebrating by finally drinking his cherished Abalor whiskey. Inside the headquarters building of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, located on Long Island in New York, although it was still night, Director Nick Fury was still working in his office, processing documents. Something's happened in London. The Victor family? Fury, looking at the report in the documents, immediately recalled the Victor family's file and showed concern, but still set it aside. As long as it didn't cause public panic, Fury would just monitor the situation. He would only use resources if there was a potential for the situation to get out of control. There was a knock on the door. "Come in." The door opened, and a male agent walked in, handing a document to Fury. "Sir, we detected abnormal energy fluctuations and an earthquake source 30 kilometers west of New York." "How big was it?" "The energy fluctuation peaked for 10 seconds, comparable to 3,000 tons of TNT, and the earthquake also had a brief magnitude of 8, but the affected area was only about 10 kilometers. The agent reported, "We dispatched a response team to investigate and took pictures of the scene." Fury frowned as he flipped through the document, which contained about 20 photographs showing the scene from various distances and perspectives. In a deep jungle within a 10-kilometer radius, dense cracks were clearly visible, especially in the central area where there was a collapse trace with a diameter of over 1,000 meters, significantly damaging the surrounding natural environment. "This doesn't look like it was caused by explosives." "Yes, we checked the site. There was a reaction for gunpowder, but it was likely caused by a few guns. We couldn't find the source of the abnormal energy, and the area also experienced about 30 minutes of thunderstorms, with many places showing signs of being struck by lightning. Our team discovered a significant depression underground believed to be for constructing subterranean areas. However, due to collapses, it will take a considerable amount of time to excavate. Residents living in the western suburbs have reported multiple times witnessing a very peculiar sight. In their descriptions, they saw a golden beam of light shooting straight into the sky from the west, lasting only about 10 seconds. Listening to the report and reviewing the documents, Fury nodded. "Gather information on whether there has been significant traffic in and out of that area over the past month, and lock down the region." "Yes, sir." The agent turned and left, leaving Fury in contemplation. The power of an explosion equivalent to 3,000 tons of TNT within 10 seconds does not match the destruction observed in the area. 3,000 tons of TNT could create a crater over 100 meters in diameter and more than 20 meters deep. The lethality could reach up to 500 meters, and people a kilometer away could also be injured, while glass windows 4 to 5 kilometers away would shatter. The footage of the scene and the effects of the explosion do not align at all. Additionally, considering the 10-second phenomenon seen by residents of the western suburbs, it was likely caused by that golden beam of light. The initial site inspection may yield more clues. Fury grew more interested in this so-called golden beam. What could cause such a spectacle and force? Some kind of newly developed military weapon? A weapon that fires from the ground to the sky? Some sort of anti-air weapon? It's all speculation for now. Fury can only wait for the report from the site inspection, but for some reason, a name suddenly flashed through his mind. It couldn't be him, could it? Thinking this, Fury reached out to pick up the phone nearby. Meanwhile, Bai Xiao was leisurely driving a Chevrolet SUV, cruising slowly along the highway. The road was deserted at night, lit only by the headlights of the vehicle, a mere glow to the ordinary eye. But to him, day and night were no different. Humming a tune while driving, he was in high spirits. The loot from the Blood God instance was substantial, letting him feast on thousands of vampires in one swoop, not to mention the Blood God himself. One could say the essence of life from a single blood god was about 4 times that of the thousands of vampires combined. He had touched a certain limit. Yes, a limit, an indescribable feeling. The specific numbers were impossible to calculate since the magnitude of his magic power was off the charts. The greater his magic power, the larger the boost to his combat abilities. Having fought the blood god, he had a basic understanding of his own strength, yet he had not used his full capabilities. It seemed intense, but he had only employed brute strength, not even pushing himself to max mode. A slight increase in intensity, and the blood god was dead. Of course, the situation was normal, as magic was overwhelmingly effective against vampires, and his use of mind storms and bombs to seal the blood god's blood magic played a significant role. Now, having absorbed the essence of life from the blood god, his strength had increased several-fold. At his level, this was not simply a linear enhancement, but an exponential increase across all dimensions of his life form. As for this limit, Xiao had his theories. It seemed to be that of the Celestial. The Celestial was a step below the Sky Father, with a vast difference in power between them, and an even greater disparity below the Celestial. Though the distinctions in these levels were somewhat blurred and not strictly hierarchical, they represented entirely different tiers of existence. Compared to those below, the Celestial was already on another level of life. A life form at a high enough level to reach Celestial status would need time to cross over, often spanning tens of thousands of years. Bai Xiao suspected he might also be at this stage of the process. Others might need extensive time to undergo this transformation, but he did not. He just needed to slay more powerful life forms and absorb enough life essence to break through this limit. The required amount might be immense. Indeed, he seemed destined for the path of a god slayer, strengthening through killing with no return. Despite reaching a bottleneck, Earth did not offer many suitable prey for him to harvest life essence from. But Bai Xiao was still happy. After all, it had only been a year since his transmigration, and he had already reached this stage. He still had over a decade to grow, and if Earth lacked suitable prey, he could always seek them beyond Earth. Some so-called gods were not beyond his reach to kill. It seemed that the omnipotent city housed many gods, a thought that almost made Bai Xiao salivate, though these gods were not easy to kill. Zeus and Odin were gods of the same caliber, yet they were formidable. Going to the omnipotent city to slaughter gods would be tantamount to declaring war, and he might face a coalition of gods from beyond the city. If he were to kill, he had to do so stealthily, possibly pinning the blame on Gore, letting the god butcher to take the fall. After all, there was no difference between Gore killing and him killing. Bai Xiao's thoughts drifted slightly. He had not yet experienced slaughtering gods, but he expected it would not be lacking in experience. The future god slayer, Bai Xiao, drove home contentedly back to New York City, to Queens, through Manhattan and the Bronx, following the Bronx riverfront to reach Queens. He thought today would be like any other, with no surprises, but then the unexpected happened. Just as he passed Manhattan and entered the Bronx, he suddenly heard some unusual sounds. Sound of someone calling for help. Not far away, possibly just a few streets over. Especially when he heard several men's boisterous and beating noises, it immediately soured his good mood. Without hesitation, he turned the steering wheel and diverted towards the source of the sounds as he passed an intersection. Having lived in New York for a year, Bai Xiao had never done what so-called superheroes are supposed to do. Even slaughtering gangs and vampires was only because it was beneficial to him, though these actions might also have had a certain nature of heroism. But that was it. How strong were his senses? Just a low-grade version of Superman's. His hearing was so strong that, until today, if he wished, he could cover the entire Queens, filtering any sound he desired. Like cries for help, using his terrifying speed and leaping ability, he could, like Spider-Man, navigate the steel jungle to rescue those in distress. But he never had, not even once. Normally, he would actively block out his senses unless it involved his safety or name, maintaining them at a normal human level. Bai Xiao never proclaimed himself a superhero. Acting was tiring, and he was solely focused on becoming stronger. On this path, he killed some gangsters and dark creatures and incidentally saved some people. And that was all. He had no interest in actively rescuing others. Altruism and greatness had nothing to do with him. At most, if he encountered someone when in a good mood or needed to vent when in a bad mood, he might lend a hand. This time was no different. A coincidence that he had just undergone a strengthening phase, which prevented him from completely controlling his senses, allowed him to hear the cries, spoiling his mood further. It could only be said that the person crying for help was lucky, and those trash were not. Speeding his car, he crossed 2 streets and finally found the source of the cries a few dozen meters away from a closed supermarket. From a dark alley in the dead of night, with the streets nearly empty and only a few street lights casting dim light, creating large patches of darkness. "Please, don't do this, let me go. You're police, you can't do this, you know." The alley echoed with a woman's crying voice growing louder, accompanied by the sound of clothes being ripped. Bai Xiao glanced at the police car parked outside the alley, raised an eyebrow, opened his car door, and stepped down, turning into the alley where an unbearable scene unfolded. The alley was not clean or tidy, with 2 large garbage bins filled with various plastic bags and trash, emitting an unbearable stench. A few meters into the alley, under a metal walkway on the wall, 3 policemen in uniform were tearing at the clothes of a black-haired girl about 160 centimeters tall. Her jacket was torn, leaving only a black sweater. The girl was not strong, even frail, struggling weakly and crying in despair. But this only incited these brutes' lust even more. Bai Xiao stepped lightly forward, but one of the policemen, a white man about 30 years old, noticed him first. He turned abruptly, his expression ferocious and his tone violent. "Kid, this is not your place, nor your time to play hero. If you don't want to die, get out of here." This reverse psychology alerted the other officers, one of whom grabbed the girl's hands behind her back, while another officer simply pulled a gun from his belt. The black officer with the gun shouted at Bai Xiao, who was still approaching, "Damn it, stand still or I'll blow your head off." "Save me, no, run, sir, they will really kill you." Seeing someone approaching, the girl instinctively tried to call for help, but then realizing the danger to the newcomer, she quickly changed her plea for him to leave, not wanting a good person to be shot because of her. She was well aware that these villainous officers would really shoot, and might even kill her in the end, blaming her death on this good man, thus adding a mark of achievement to their records. Inverting right and wrong, no matter the era, there are always such people. "It seems I came at the right time." Hearing the girl's words, surprise flashed in Bai Xiao's eyes. He hadn't expected the girl to be so kind-hearted. He liked saving such good-hearted people. Standing against the only light source outside the alley, he approached step by step. The men in front of him could only see a silhouette. "You have desecrated the nobility of this profession," he said, his voice cold and piercing. "Damn brat, go to hell." The black officer cursed in rage, pulling the trigger. However, to his shock, he found himself unable to move, as if his body was frozen in place. It wasn't just him. The other 2 officers also found themselves immobilized. What further drove the officers into despair and fear was that the black officer suddenly turned the gun towards the forehead of one of the white officers beside him. "Jordan, what the hell are you doing?" the white officer screamed in terror. The black officer shouted in despair, "And no, it's not me. I can't control my body." "No." The white officer watched helplessly as the gun pointed at his forehead, his cries of despair filling the alley just before the crisp sound of a gunshot and the flash of a bullet penetrating his skull marked the end of his life. The white police officer's forehead was penetrated, and his body collapsed to the ground, his expression one of fear and despair before death. Perhaps until his last breath, he never imagined that what should have been a wonderful day would end in being killed by his own colleague. This sudden turn of events terrified the remaining 2 officers, one black and one white. Even the girl was so frightened she couldn't move. The white officer who had been restraining her wrists suddenly let go, but she didn't even realize it and just stared blankly. What the fuck is going on? The black officer was going insane, knowing that he had killed his own colleague using his gun. His gun only had his fingerprints. Even if he survived today, he would inevitably face scrutiny and possibly arrest. It's not like New York has the death penalty, but what would his department do if one officer killed another? When they came to arrest him, there was a very high chance they would draw their guns and shoot him to pieces, later claiming he was armed during the arrest. This kind of incident had become all too common. For instance, some drug dealers who had shot a police officer were still killed by the police despite having thrown away their guns and surrendered with hands raised. This was far too frequent. But now, more desperate than ever, the black officer, Jordan, found himself unable to control his own body as he turned his gun towards the remaining white officer. The white officer was nearly crying from fear, his eyes filled with terror, his body unable to move. He could only yell desperately, "Jordan, don't do this. Aren't we brothers? I don't want to." The black officer's eyes teared up, not out of remorse or anything else. It was just because he knew that after killing his remaining colleague, he would be next. The fear of death made him weep uncontrollably, driven to despair. However, his emotional breakdown couldn't stop him from pulling the trigger. With a loud bang, another shot precisely hit the remaining white officer's head, and he collapsed lifelessly to the ground. "I'm sorry, please, sir. It's my fault. I shouldn't have done this. I have disgraced my role. I won't do it again. I beg for your forgiveness for my sins." The black officer pleaded in desperation, his voice trembling, completely lacking his earlier ferocity and brutality. "Sir, I am willing to spend the rest of my life doing good deeds, using all the time I have left to atone for my sins." His desire to live made the black officer continuously beg for mercy, but Bai Xiao had no intention of sparing him. He didn't even bother to read the memories of these three garbage men to see what other crimes they had committed. He just walked up to the girl, not even glancing at the black man. The black officer automatically turned the gun on himself amidst his begging and crying, and pulled the trigger that symbolized his death. Bang! Thud! A shot to the head. Death was instantaneous, a clean execution. The black man only regretted in his final moments that he should not have joined his colleagues in their deeds. But alas, regret could not undo his fate. From being discovered by three rogue officers to being dragged into an alley to be victimized, to the three officers being shot, from despair to hope, then to astonishment. This transition almost overloaded the girl's CPU. What kind of unfolding was this? But as the last gunshot rang out and the last officer committed suicide, the girl finally came to her senses from the shock, not afraid of the eerie events that had just transpired, but rather filled with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving me. If it hadn't been for you, I might have faced misfortune." The girl's voice wasn't particularly sweet, and her looks, in Bai Xiao's view, weren't particularly refined. Certainly no match for Natasha, but decent enough. However, Bai Xiao was surprised to see something special about her. "Are you a mutant?" he asked the girl, examining her, and she noticed his gaze. She adjusted her torn coat, thankful that her sweater hadn't been ripped too badly. Having done all this, she then said softly, "Yes, I am a mutant. My name is Christine." Facing Bai Xiao, the girl did not hide her identity. Indeed, the events that had just unfolded made her immediately trust the man who had saved her. "My name is John Shaw. Are you alone?" Bai Xiao did not read the girl's memories, as he once told Professor X. He despised Professor X's reckless invasion of people's minds, especially ordinary people. Except for his prey, he generally did not read other people's memories to obtain their privacy. This wasn't about respect. It was a minimum standard he believed should exist, though he was flexible depending on the person. Clearly, the girl did not fall into this category. Just as the girl was about to speak, Bai Xiao's gaze suddenly sharpened. He heard the sound of people in the nearby residential buildings calling the police from the alley. He gestured for the girl to stop speaking and took the initiative, saying, "This isn't the place to talk. Maybe you should get something to eat." From the girl's thin frame and her lips, which appeared dry and cracked, he could tell she had endured much hardship, especially considering her clothes looked unwashed for a long time. She must have been living rough for a while. "Thank you." The gratitude in the girl's eyes deepened, and she felt so moved that she vowed to do anything for the man before her. Bai Xiao looked at the girl, Christine, curiously. Hero saves the damsel and earns her devotion. It seemed this plot was unfolding for him, but he didn't say much. Instead, he led the girl to his car and drove her towards Queens. As for the events that had transpired, whether or not the NYPD would come knocking, he didn't care in the slightest. Before gaining power, he had kept a low profile, but now that he was strong, there was no need to hide. Besides, he believed things would naturally settle down on their own. Inside a fast food restaurant in Queens, the place isn't very crowded, especially compared to the daytime. Sitting by the window, Christine is greedily swallowing big bites of a triple-layer burger and an Orleans chicken leg, reminiscent of the way Bai Xiao ate ravenously when he first enhanced his abilities. Bai Xiao is sitting opposite her, eating elegantly, bite by bite, which looks more graceful compared to how delicious it is. Having killed the blood god earlier, Bai Xiao's life level has once again reached its limit. However, with his magical powers, he doesn't need to eat large amounts to sustain his energy and nutrients for daily activities and his super brain operations. So, he is just accompanying Christine, eating things like burgers, which he neither dislikes nor particularly enjoys. For Christine, who has been wandering for a long time and hasn't had enough food, she is eating what would be considered a meal for a full-grown American. After eating, she takes a big gulp of cola and can't help but burp. After finishing, she sees Bai Xiao and gives a slightly embarrassed smile. Bai Xiao doesn't mind. His appetite was far more intense before. He used to want to pour the plate directly into his stomach. Compared to him back then, Christine is quite elegant. I was born in Chicago. Christine, after wandering for a long time and encountering various situations, trusts Bai Xiao deeply and slowly begins to share her story. She was born in Chicago, and, unlike some mutants with tragic pasts, she had a very peaceful and beautiful childhood. However, this peace didn't last. At the age of 14, she discovered her mutant powers. At that time, mainstream societal views were generally discriminatory and hostile toward mutants. She had heard her parents speak disparagingly about mutants, so naturally, she assumed her parents, like other humans, would reject her as their daughter and decided to run away from home. She wandered aimlessly for 2 years, experiencing injustice and bullying. Especially tonight, as she prepared to find a place to sleep on the streets, she was discovered by 3 brutish policemen who learned of her homeless status, which made them target her. If it hadn't been for Bai Xiao, she might have been. Bai Xiao patiently listened and then nodded. "What is your power?" Bai Xiao suddenly asked. "I don't know." Christine shook her head. "I only know that when my power is out of control, my strength increases significantly, but I can't control it. It only erupts in times of crisis." Her powers were unclear to her, and they only manifested occasionally. If she could control them actively, tonight wouldn't have happened. She could have thrown those policemen 10 meters away with a push. Bai Xiao thoughtfully nodded. He could tell that, at her core, she was just like any normal person. There was no energy within her body. But for a moment, he noticed a change. The muscle, blood flow, heart rate. Everything was vastly different from normal, but it was just a momentary change, so he asked if she was a mutant. Apparently, it was a strength-enhancing ability. For Bai Xiao, it was a relatively low-level power. Real strength enhancement involves an overall enhancement of muscles, cells, and bones to augment strength. In terms of speed and explosiveness, it should also be comprehensive. The reason it's considered low-level is exactly because it can't endlessly increase strength like the Hulk, whose enhancement is linked to gamma rays and his father. But even with strength enhancement, there's a limit because the physical base is not strong enough. It's like having a powerful engine, but the other components can't support the energy it emits. This is a genetic flaw of mutants, as this group of people are just experimental subjects for some. Bai Xiao doesn't care about the mutant community. He just watched as the girl ate her fill. Looking at her tattered sweater, old pants, and ill-fitting shoes, he spoke, "I could take you to a mutant academy, a school filled with mutants. The headmaster there treats mutants well." But before he could finish, the girl shook her head firmly, indicating, "I want to stay with you. You saved my life, and I want to repay you. First, I saved you purely by chance. Those idiots disturbed my mood. And besides, you can't repay me. Bai Xiao shook his head in refusal. Right now, he's still immersed in his journey of becoming stronger, and he hadn't thought about having a follower. Moreover, it's not really about repayment. It's more like he's sheltering her. I can help you with anything. I can learn combat skills and work hard to master my power, which is also very strong, Christine urgently said. She had wandered for a long time, and at her most desperate, Bai Xiao had saved her. She had experienced countless dark moments, and Bai Xiao had become a light in her heart, a light compelling enough for her to chase like a moth to a flame. Christine, I'm very dangerous, and the things I'm involved in are also very dangerous. Bai Xiao looked at the girl. What you consider as darkness, injustice, bullying in my world, even in the future, are just child's play. Do you understand? It's not just about death. Even death might just be a wishful thinking. Bai Xiao cut short, not paying attention to the girl's pleading eyes, and took her to the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. On the way, Christine was downcast and silent. Eventually, they arrived at the Xavier School in Westchester, New York. It was evening, and the large iron gate of the school was right in front of them. Bai Xiao looked at Christine. The latter looked eagerly at Bai Xiao, but after a moment of silence, he said, "This place will let you grow, although I don't like that headmaster. At least he's decent towards the kids at the school." Christine was silent and then asked, "Can I come and find you later?" Of course. Bai Xiao was only hesitant to have someone by his side. While he did not dislike the girl, he did not want her to be near him because he wouldn't be staying in New York for long. He would be traveling around the world hunting, in the process of accumulating life essence needed for his growth during this phase, and wouldn't have time to stay put. He couldn't possibly take Christine on his erratic journeys. In truth, the girl was too weak, and he didn't want to carry a burden. There weren't many on Earth who could concern him, but if an encounter occurred, the girl's chance of survival would be slim. Christine, unaware of Bai Xiao's thoughts, nodded. She had a plan. She could see that Bai Xiao didn't reject her, but the main reason he didn't accept her was likely her weakness. So, she intended to grow as much as possible in this school, actively master her abilities, and one day be strong enough to help Bai Xiao, so she could openly stay by his side. As they spoke, the huge iron gate of the school automatically opened, and Bai Xiao, without surprise, drove inside. He looked around with interest. It had to be said Professor X was certainly a hidden rich man, a second-generation wealthy individual. His family's estate was very substantial, and this mutant school was originally based on Professor X's residence, essentially a castle estate. The neatly trimmed lawns, trees, and a large lake, with the school nestled among the beautiful surroundings, always provided a feeling of openness and peace. And beneath this castle, there were also specially built secret places, such as battle rooms, laboratories, and spaces for placing brainwave amplifiers. In the evening, the calls of birds and insects could be heard. Driving along the road to the school's entrance, Professor X, in his wheelchair, and members of the X-Men were already waiting to welcome their guests. Professor X greeted Bai Xiao and Christine warmly. "Welcome to the school, Mr. Bai Xiao and this lady." Professor X was smarter than before. He knew why he and Bai Xiao had previously clashed. Thus, this time, he did not use his psychic powers to probe Christine's memories. "I really like the atmosphere here." Bai Xiao glanced at the distant dormitory building, hearing the playful laughter of the students and seeing a group of mischievous, curious students peeking through the window glass, wondering who the headmaster and teachers were welcoming. "This place is always open to you, Mr. Bai Xiao." Professor X spoke unhurriedly, but always made people feel unconsciously at ease. This was somewhat like charisma. This kind of charisma was somewhat esoteric. Indeed, some people possess such charm, and clearly, Professor X was one of them. But coincidentally, neither Bai Xiao nor Christine were swayed by this. Bai Xiao had seen through what kind of person Professor X was, and being a telepath, he always maintained a rational distance. As for Christine, it was simple. Bai Xiao had told her before that he did not like the headmaster, so naturally, she also instinctively carried a sense of vigilance and defense. I don't care about your opinion, Professor, Bai Xiao stated bluntly, although his words upset a certain bespectacled young man. He continued, the things I pursue have never needed others' judgment or opinion, as long as you don't act smart and do something presumptuous. Because, as I've told you before, I am very dangerous, and towards enemies, I have only one method, to send them to hell. Cyclops Scott snorted in anger, wanting to speak, but Jean grabbed his arm and shook her head at him, signaling him not to cause trouble. Scott reluctantly restrained himself. Professor X didn't show a hint of anger, but gently said, I respect your thoughts, Mr. Bai Xiao, and I believe we won't become enemies. I just hope you can maintain a kind of mercy towards the world and other people. Mercy? Bai Xiao chuckled silently. He indeed had mercy, but enemies did not deserve his mercy. However, he didn't argue further with the professor. Instead, he patted Christine's shoulder. This is Christine, the person I unexpectedly rescued tonight, also a mutant. So, Professor Charles, will you take her in? Bai Xiao didn't use a commanding tone. Whether they took her in was their business. He was there simply because Christine was a mutant, and Professor X's ideology was to shelter and enlighten fellow mutants. Of course, the mutant school welcomes all. Child, you can consider this your home. We will teach you to grow. Professor X looked at Christine warmly. She first looked at Bai Xiao, then turned to the professor and nodded quietly. Thank you, Professor. The professor was pleased that the school had gained another child, introducing her to other X-Men members, all teachers greeting her kindly, including Cyclops Scott, who was displeased with Bai Xiao. He wouldn't take out his frustration on the girl, especially since she was also his fellow mutant. Professor X sincerely invited Bai Xiao to visit the school upon his arrival. Bai Xiao did not refuse. The school has dormitories that can accommodate hundreds of students, towers, long tunnel corridors, vast stables, elegant greenhouses, and a garden built along the mountainside. The medieval armor along the corridors and the creaking wooden floors in the castle give a sense of crossing through time, as if one were in a mansion that had stood for over 100 years. The school looks uniquely beautiful in the evening light. Storm, Aurora Monroe, took Christine to her place of residence. The rest followed the professor, chatting casually as they walked along the road with Bai Xiao to the lakeside. Every time I come here, it reminds me of my youth, swinging on that tree and the memories of Raven, said the professor. It's a pity, however, that the relationship between humans and mutants has deteriorated. Everything has changed. Not all accept mutants. They do not understand the helplessness and sorrow of mutants. They just hate them more. Bai Xiao, I appreciate that you saved those children. You saved their lives. Professor Charles, sitting in his wheelchair, pushed by Jean, spoke these words beside Bai Xiao. To me, there is no difference between ordinary people and mutants, only good and evil. But many people don't think the same. How they think is irrelevant to me. If you are grateful, then perhaps we can make a deal. If you need help, I will do everything I can. The group paused by the lakeside, and the professor earnestly said to Bai Xiao, I need an aircraft, one that allows me to travel freely around the world. I can pay a fair price for it. Bai Xiao revealed his intent. This was Bai Xiao's second reason for visiting the school. Now, his only limitation is that he cannot fly, or cannot fly for long durations. Currently, he can perform short flights through his superhuman jumps and even detect air currents to propel himself through them. But to travel across continents, or from one country to another, is too slow. Thus, he needs a private jet, one that can operate independently of national aviation regulations. This would facilitate his travels around the world in search of suitable targets. Only S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Mutant School could meet his condition. Beast, an unquestionable genius scientist, had personally built the Blackbird jet, an essential tool for the X-Men to rescue mutants worldwide. S.H.I.E.L.D. was too bureaucratic for him, but Professor Xavier's place was just right. Today, from two traitorous vampire elders, he had obtained a large sum of US dollars, enough to pay for this transaction. Professor Charles was indeed surprised that, Bai Xiao wanted to trade for a plane. So were the others. With his powerful telepathy, Professor Charles's thoughts moved quickly, but he did not refuse the deal. Hank, he looked toward a man wearing a suit and glasses, looking somewhat delicate. Hank, also known as Beast, the top scientist at the school and among the world's brightest minds. Hank, upon receiving the professor's inquiring gaze, paused to think. Then he said, "Building such a plane is very expensive. Even though I built it myself, the cost could exceed 150 million US dollars. In this era, 150 million US dollars had significant purchasing power. To put it into perspective, the most advanced fighter jet in the US, the F-22, costs about 200 million US dollars, including many advanced weapons, coatings, and high-grade materials from suppliers. His privately built combat plane, not equipped with weapons and having low labor costs, was expensive primarily in terms of time. Even so, ordinary people could not afford such a cost. But Baishao didn't care about the money. Even spending 150 million US dollars, he could easily cover the expenses extracted from the two traitorous vampire elders. What he wanted was to exchange money for time. "So, when can it be delivered to me?" Baishao looked at Hank. The latter hesitated. "If you need it urgently, I can deliver the Blackbird Mark II to you, originally meant to replace the Mark I for Jean and others' missions. The construction is nearly complete, and it could be delivered in about a month. I'm more concerned about whether it can evade the radar systems of mainstream countries. Of course, the Blackbird Mark II incorporates materials that absorb radar waves and can interfere with radar systems using non-resonant and resonant magnetic radar-absorbing materials," Hank continued. Baishao patiently listened without interrupting Hank's enthusiasm and nodded in satisfaction. From Hank's description, the Blackbird Mark II was like an aerial ghost, designed to maximize evasion of detection by radars worldwide, thus avoiding unnecessary disputes and complications. In fact, the Blackbird jets later developed by Hank were among the most advanced in human civilization. This genius was only second to Tony Stark and Shuri of Wakanda. Knowing this, he took over the conversation. "I will transfer the money to you tomorrow." Transferring over 150 million US dollars was typically complex, as ordinary accounts have daily banking limits. But since he had the accounts of two traitorous vampire elders with substantial assets and business in New York, their accounts were senior VIPs with the bank, allowing unlimited transfers, usually just requiring a confirmation call from a dedicated service personnel. "Okay," Hank nodded, then realized something and quickly added, "If you need refueling or maintenance for the Blackbird Mark II, I can give you a contact. There's a private oil consortium with refueling stations worldwide, though the price is quite high. Petroleum, as a non-renewable resource in the world, is the most important resource in modern civilization. Petroleum is even referred to as currency, indicating its preciousness. Over the years, countless wars, big and small, have been fought over oil, giving rise to numerous oil thieves. These oil thieves profit significantly by selling oil privately. They steal from oil magnates and national oil reserves. After all, as long as the profit is sufficient, some people will take risks, and oil is no exception. The fuel used by fighter jets is kerosene, a light petroleum product obtained from natural or synthetic oil through distillation or cracking. The profits involved in this trade are enormous, leading to the emergence of so-called private airfields. These private airfields serve certain wealthy individuals, mob bosses, or terrorist organizations who prefer to remain unseen. The greatest benefit is that it helps them conceal their flight paths and whereabouts. Hank thought of Baishao needing to fly all over the world, and since planes need fueling, he thoughtfully provided a private contact for fueling. With the right payment, after-sales service is guaranteed. Professor Charles indeed comes from a wealthy second-generation family with substantial assets. However, funding the creation of school for mutants and underground laboratories, as well as building the Blackbird jet, has been financially challenging over the years. The research Hank himself conducts costs a fortune in dollars, and although he has achieved some results, the investment and returns are not always proportional, with many experiments ending in failure and material losses that are irrevocable. Now that he can earn dollars through orders from Baishao, he is naturally happy. Although he sold the ready-made Blackbird Mark II, having the experience of building it, reconstructing another Blackbird would not take too much time. At most, he would let the X-Men continue to use the first generation for a while. Bai Xiao is very satisfied. Before creating flying abilities or learning teleportation magic, he will likely need this plane for a while, making things much more convenient. Since the transaction is complete, Bai Xiao does not plan to stay longer. After greeting the professor and others, he drove away from the Mutant Academy. Professor Charles and others, including Storm, who was rushed back by Christine, watched as Bai Xiao's black Chevrolet departed. At this point, Cyclops, Scott, asked with some confusion, what does he want with the Blackbird Mark II? And where did he get so much money? I remember the professor mentioned that his family background wouldn't allow him such a large sum. Does he have the qualifications for a bank transfer? Don't underestimate him, Scott. He is more mysterious than we think, said Professor Charles gently. We do not need to probe his secrets. We only need to know that he is on the right path. Why are you so sure? Scott was even more puzzled as the professor's attitude had changed quickly. Previously, because Bai Xiao had rescued innocent mutant children from a striker base, the professor believed the Asian boy was fundamentally good. But this time, the professor's attitude was unpredictable. Trust? In the western suburbs of New York, didn't you detect a huge energy fluctuation and seismic source? Professor Charles looked around at everyone. Jean frowned and nodded. Yes, we were about to go and investigate, but you stopped us. And you looked shocked at that moment, so, Professor, what did you see then? I saw a battle between humans and a demonic god, Jean. It was a battle that still leaves me in awe, Professor Charles said, tilting his head slightly as if visualizing the scenes he had seen. Magnificent, intense, awe-inspiring battle. A true god-slaying battle. Was he one of the main characters? Asked Wolverine, Logan, casually puffing on a cigar. Yes, there are many secrets in this world that ordinary people do not know. As a psychic, during my past uses of the Cerebro Amplifier, I saw races not of this world, hidden among or secluded from human society. They possess more primal and powerful physical abilities than humans, as well as their long lives. Professor Charles sighed. But you never told us about these. Storm expressed her confusion. They and we are on two non-parallel lines. We are more concerned with our mutant brethren, how to make humans accept us and live peacefully, while those creatures have never intersected with us, hinted Professor Charles. The others understood immediately, except Logan, who remained puzzled. In fact, Charles was not concerned about the secrets of these extraordinary life forms, their existence, or their actions. As long as they did not target mutants, he would not provoke them. After all, just dealing with the conflicts between humans and mutants was already exhausting for Charles. That child is kinder than we imagined. He has found another direction, Charles said with a smile. Originally, when he learned that Bai Xiao had been brutally killing gangsters, he was worried that Bai Xiao was becoming extreme and paranoid. But today, seeing his battle with the blood god Deacon, and knowing that Bai Xiao had been low-key for months, he realized that Bai Xiao had targeted the vampire race. This eased his mind somewhat. He would rather see Bai Xiao hunt vampires than kill people. After all, these races are not human. Charles supported this, also guessing why Bai Xiao needed a plane to fly around the world. Thus he agreed to the transaction. Also, whether it's an illusion or not, Charles felt that seeing Bai Xiao again, the boy seemed to have grown too quickly, to the point that his psychic powers were sending him warnings, a kind of premonition that, until now, he had only experienced with one other person. Apocalypse. The man who had once upheaved and changed the world, nearly causing Charles's death, left Charles secretly astonished. Perhaps this boy really was, as that old man said, a son of God. In a luxurious room of a beachfront mansion in Long Island, New York, a hand reached out from under the covers, and a man in his 20s, clad in boxer shorts, casually moved away the two fair arms draped over him and got out of bed. Yawning, he walked out of the room and made his way to the spacious and luxurious living room bar, where he picked up a bottle of whiskey and a thick-bottomed square glass from the shelf. After pouring himself a drink and taking a sip, at that moment, A male voice sounded in the living room. "Good evening, sir. I believe there is something I need to report to you. About 30 minutes ago, abnormal energy fluctuations were detected 30 kilometers west of New York, lasting for 10 seconds, equivalent to 3,000 tons of TNT. Additionally, there was a magnitude 8 earthquake covering a 10-kilometer radius. Perhaps it's a military weapon test? You know I'm not interested in these things, Jarvis." Jarvis, undeterred by the man's nonchalance, continued. Furthermore, residents in the western suburbs, Area 08, reported that they had seen a very peculiar phenomenon, a golden column of light piercing the sky, lasting also for 10 seconds. There's even footage of it. After he finished speaking, the huge LCD screen in the living room automatically lit up, displaying a blurry night shot taken by someone on a higher floor. In the distance, under the night sky, a golden beam was clearly visible, starkly contrasting with the darkness. Visible around it were traces of lightning tearing through the sky. This piqued the man's interest. Is this some kind of special high-density, compressed energy being ejected from the ground into the sky, causing a thunderstorm reaction? What kind of weapon could cause such an effect? "Hey, honey," a sweet female voice called from another room, and without turning back, the man shouted, "I'll be right there, darling. You know I have a habit of watching the World Cup at night." In truth, he never watched the World Cup. Some departments have cordoned off the area, sir, and many related images have been deleted from the content. This has indeed caught my interest. Do you know what I'm going to do, Jarvis? I guess it's sleep. Haha, right. Enjoying a beautiful night with a gorgeous blonde is currently my top priority. Hearing that governmental agencies were controlling the scene, the man decisively returned to his room for a night of joyous growth. Though he was intrigued by the weapon of highly concentrated energy, he was a genius, and he was confident in developing a weapon that would cause an even bigger sensation. Because he was Tony Stark. However, he thought it might be due to some experimental accident. Otherwise, other agencies wouldn't be involved. But what did it matter? He was not about to waste a beautiful night worrying about it. Driving to Queens, just as he parked at his doorstep, he saw a man, a middle-aged Caucasian, smartly dressed, waiting on the street in front of his house. As soon as he opened the car door and stepped out, the man seemed to recognize him and walked straight toward him. "So, is there something you need help with, sir?" Bai Xiao raised his eyebrows, closed the car door, and looked at the middle-aged Caucasian. The latter stared back at Bai Xiao, as if sizing him up, as if confirming something. "George Stacy, from the Queens Police Department. I'm a police chief." "Okay, so Chief George, you were specifically waiting for me." The young man smiled and asked, "I know who you are, kid. You don't have to put on an act in front of me. Everything you've done should get you arrested, subject to legal punishment. I don't know what kind of backing you have, but I'm just here to warn you. Stop doing what you're doing. Your circumstances don't justify you becoming an executioner." Chief George stared at the boy's innocent and sunny demeanor. He was serious and spoke earnestly. He clearly knew what kind of ferocity and terror lay hidden beneath this seemingly harmless appearance. He felt as though behind this boy, he could see countless lost souls entwined with him, especially since the boy's half-face was illuminated by the streetlight, while the other half remained in the darkness. Just like his identity, intertwined between light and darkness. Chief George held his own ideals. No one could supersede the supremacy of the law. His duty was to arrest criminals, regardless of the pressure from above, but he was still unwilling to give up. "Do you have a happy family, Chief George?" Bai Xiao suddenly spoke, causing Chief George's face to change as he thought the other was threatening his family. A flash of anger crossed his eyes, and he was about to speak when Bai Xiao continued, stopping him. "But have you thought about how many happy families are torn apart by those people? Why can't you use your law to punish the sins they've committed?" Chief George frowned and fell silent. Of course, he knew why. Bai Xiao shook his head. "So, there are loopholes in the law, allowing those people to kill countless innocents while remaining at large. Also, I can tell you that the law can't punish me either. I don't have this so-called backing you think protects me and makes you give up. It's not just protecting me, but also people like you. You're a good person, but don't try to aim your gun at me. I kill because they fit the criteria of prey. Others who don't fit, I can't be bothered to kill. But if someone points a weapon at me, then they're my enemy. Understand? George. As he spoke, a flash of gold sparkled in his eyes. And from George's perspective, the boy seemed to transform into a towering wave crashing toward him, instantly filling his heart with powerlessness and despair. His back was soaked with cold sweat at that moment. And it was then that George truly realized that this boy was not just an ordinary human, but a superhuman possessing unimaginable and incredible power. Goodbye, Chief George, Bai Xiao said gently. And George, as if soulless, instinctively turned and walked toward his car, driving away from the scene. After George had driven away, a familiar voice rang in his ears. Although you say that, I think you were just warning him. You wouldn't actually kill him, right? A woman's slightly husky voice seems to constantly entice men's nerves. She possesses a unique charm. Clearly, the only woman with such a voice could be Natasha. Bai Xiao turned around and saw Natasha coming toward him, wearing a coat, a knitted sweater, ladies' jeans, and sneakers. You seem quite free. Shouldn't people in your profession be very busy? Bai Xiao glossed over the topic. Yes, I was supposed to be on vacation, but unexpectedly, I was still at home taking a bath in my newly purchased bathtub, thinking about going shopping for new clothes and cosmetics tomorrow. Unfortunately, a phone call woke me from this beautiful dream. Natasha complained, her tone sounding like casual chatter between friends. Your efficiency is indeed very high. Bai Xiao knew why she had come at this time. However, he was not surprised. With an organization like S.H.I.E.L.D., if their efficiency weren't high, they would be close to disbanding. You can't imagine the expression on my face when I heard the news, Shaw. I thought you'd stay quiet for a while. Natasha stood in front of Bai Xiao, looked him over, and affirmed the surrounding environment. This is a good place to retire. The environment is very nice, very quiet. So, you don't want to invite me to see your new home? I don't think we are that familiar, Natasha. Huh, I thought we were friends? Saying that kind of hurts a lady's feelings. It's very ungentlemanly. Natasha made a sad expression. It indeed made her look pitiful. But Bai Xiao didn't fall for it. He straightforwardly said, You know I'm not a man of many words. Whatever you want to know, you'll have to find out in other ways. I don't have the leisure to explain. After saying this, Bai Xiao turned and walked toward his car, leaving a helpless Natasha behind. Watching Bai Xiao drive into the garage and the lights in the apartment come on, Natasha shook her head slightly, turned around, and left, pulling out her phone. Hey, boss, I failed. A deep voice came from the other end of the phone. It seems he doesn't completely consider you a friend, Natasha. Getting into his heart isn't that easy, boss. He has completely closed himself off from everyone in this world, maintaining suspicion and distance. Then let's keep it that way. We found 2 other eyewitness clues. I think they can give us a satisfactory response. Okay, don't tell me. I'm still on vacation. Natasha hung up the phone, walked to the roadside, opened the door of a McLaren sports car, and drove away into the night. Inside the house, Bai Xiao, wearing a sweater and holding a coffee, watched the disappearing sports car through the window. Did you find Blade and that old man? On the West Coast in a repair shop, Blade, shirtless, sat in a chair while Whistler was helping him treat some troublesome wounds. With a trace of fresh blood on his lips and an empty blood bag on the metal table beside him, Blade had clearly just had a meal. With your healing abilities, you should be fully healed in about 2 days. Finally, Whistler finished treating Blade's wounds, patted his shoulder, causing a sharp pain due to the wound there, but the tough man didn't utter a sound, straightening up. He turned his head towards the direction of the garage door, and at that moment, Whistler also became aware. He turned to look at the surveillance computer next to him and saw several black SUVs parked outside the garage, a group of people stepping out, all armed, though they did not draw their weapons. It was hard to tell if they were enemies. The cautious old hunter slowly retreated into the shadows, while Blade stood up unhurriedly, put on a t-shirt that was hanging on a nearby rack, and walked up to the men. The group entered as the roller door was opened. The leader was a middle-aged white man, who approached Blade and extended his hand. Hello, Mr. Eric. We are from a special government agency here to investigate an incident that occurred 30 kilometers west of New York. If possible, we would like your cooperation in our investigation." The man spoke politely, without any aggressive tendencies. Blade glanced at the man's hand and chose not to shake it, just looking coldly at the man in front of him. "What do you want to know?" "You may not be aware, but we have been keeping an eye on you, Blade." The man smiled. "It's another beautiful day, sunny though the temperature had dropped, but Bai Xiao, with his physical condition, felt no discomfort from the cold. Waking up from sleep, he prepared himself some breakfast. He had bought noodles, condiments, and frozen dumplings from a shop in Chinatown. He made a tomato and egg noodle dish, fried dumplings, and a sandwich, and happily started eating. After clearing a dungeon named Blood God, Bai Xiao planned to take a month off, at least until the jet delivery. Last night, he had transferred $80 million as a deposit to Hank's account through the personal banking services of 2 vampire elders. The rest of the money would be transferred after the jet was delivered. With the memories of 2 vampire elders, dealing with bank staff was easy. This month, he would spend time honing his newly gained powers and magic, and also working on unlocking his ability to fly. After breakfast and cleaning up, he drove to an uninhabited area outside New York. This was a large nature area with forests and a lake, very scenic. The car was loaded with camping and barbecue equipment. He planned to stay here for 2 days. Finding a nice spot by the lake, he parked the car, set up the tent, and after arranging everything, he stood by the lake and started his first attempt. Flying, always the most coveted ability. Some might fear heights, but others would wish to soar through the skies with wings, and Bai Xiao was no different. He had no fear of heights, as his physical condition meant even falling from tens of thousands of feet wouldn't kill him.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.